Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Cabbage Head Fanfics. Back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Becomes Vigilante Kage? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku Midoriya was a dead man, but Kage was very much alive. Kage was currently hopping around Mustafu, Japan, on his way to the nearby police station, simply because he enjoyed annoying a certain detective. A smile crept onto the vigilante's face as he continued hopping across rooftops. The streets had been surprisingly quiet that night, which meant less work for him, but it made Kage wary. It was almost never quiet at night, and that was why it was so much more fun to patrol then. There were more villains and criminals out, and it didn't help that the heroes hardly ever came out at night. Most of them were only heroes for the fame and the money, which meant the moment the cameras stopped filming and the lights went out, they left. Enter Kage, one of Japan's most infamous vigilantes. He had started wandering the streets of Mustafu about 3 years ago, and since then he had stopped countless criminals and villains from committing their crimes. The best part, no one knew who he really was. Almost no one knew what he looked like, and those who had seen him could only describe a flash of black and bright green eyes. Green eyes were not an uncommon trait, so the Mustafu police had not been able to make any headway on the Kage case. But that didn't stop them from being interrupted almost every night by some sort of loud explosion outside the station. The first time this had happened, Tsukachi had panicked, hurrying outside with his gun in hand to try to find the source of the commotion. But instead of finding a person, there was just a small note sitting on the police station steps. The note wasn't what caused Tsukachi to groan, that was caused by the millions of little pieces of glitter scattered across the street. The note was short. Hey Mr. Detective Man. Since you seem to have a lot on your hands at the moment, I have taken the liberty of rounding up some local criminals. You will find them unconscious at the addresses listed below. Yours Kage. Since then, similar notes had turned up at the police station almost every night, accompanied by some sort of explosion, meaning the Mustafu police department had gotten awfully good at cleaning up glitter. A muffled cry broke through Kage's train of thought. He stopped just on the edge of a roof, gazing down at the alley below him. A girl was lying on the ground, covered in dirt and blood, crying as a man walked towards her slowly. Kage silently landed on the ground behind the man, catching the end of his sentence, "Quirkless trash." The man pulled back his hand to strike the girl, but Kage had had enough. He jumped forward and grabbed the larger man's arm, twisting his wrist to the side. The man let out a shout and turned around, trying to pull his arm out of Kage's grip. Suddenly, he felt a sharp pain in his hand. Glancing down, Kage saw what looked like a knife sticking straight out of the man's arm. It had sliced across the top of Kage's hand, not too deep, but enough for him to loosen his grip. The man pulled away quickly before jumping forward again, more blades seemingly growing from his skin. Kage leaped back, reaching behind him for something. He closed his fingers around one of his eskrima sticks, pulling it out of the sheath on his back. Dodging another attack from the man, Kage rushed forward, jamming the stick into the man's gut. He pressed a small button on the side, and electricity shot out of the stick, shocking the man with the knife skin. He fell backward, but somehow he was still standing. Damn it. That should have been enough to knock him out. The man yelled before charging again, this time pulling in all of his small blades to produce one long sword from the palm of his hand. Leaping out of the way, Kage just missed getting skewered, but he felt sharp pain in his side. The huge blade hadn't missed him completely. I need to finish this quickly before I lose too much blood. I need to help that girl. Stepping forward, Kage pulled out his other eskrima stick from the sheath on his back. As the man charged him again, he stood there, waiting for the right moment. Right before the man would have run him through with his blade, Kage jumped straight up, landing on the man's back and kicking down. The man face-planted in the ground and let out a groan. Before he could try to stand up again, Kage pressed both eskrima sticks into the man's back and pushed the buttons. The man's body jerked once before lying still. Stepping off of him, Kage checked his pulse, ensuring he was still alive, before turning back to the girl. She was cowering in the corner of the alley, tears running down her dirty face. Cautiously, Kage stepped forward, kneeling on the ground to be at eye level with her. She couldn't have been older than 10, and the bruises covering her body ignited a surge of anger within him. He had to find her parents. Kage. Step away from the girl. Kage sighed, straightening up and turning towards the voice. Parents would have been good, but a hero would work too. He smiled under his mask, taking a few steps towards the newcomer at the mouth of the alley. The hero's face was shadowed, but his black hair floated above his head, and his eyes shone a dark red, cutting through the night. Even in the darkness, Kage recognized him. Black hair, black clothes, a capture scarf, and a perpetually tired expression. Well, hello there, Eraserhead. How are you doing on this fine evening? Eraser just looked at the shorter man with his glowing red eyes. You heard me, Kage. Kage's smile widened, and he took another step forward. Suddenly, the wound in his side flared with pain. He gritted his teeth, not wanting Eraser to know he was hurt. That he was weak. Because that was what he was, wasn't it? That was the reason he could never be a true hero. He was too weak. Reaching behind him, Kage shoved his Eskrima sticks back into their sheath and pulled out a grappling hook instead. He saw Eraser's capture scarf shoot out, but Kage was already flying through the air, landing on the roof of the building and rolling to his feet. He smiled down at Eraser, who had chosen to check on the girl instead of following him. Make sure she gets back to her family, would you, Eraser? Thanks. Without a second glance, Kage turned and ran, jumping over alleys and sprinting across rooftops. He could feel himself losing steam. His blood loss was finally catching up to him. His vision was starting to cloud. He wouldn't make it home in time. So, I might be seeing you sooner than I planned. There was only one other place Kage could go, and he hoped he could get there before bleeding out. Turning on his heel, he dashed to the left, towards the only other safe place he knew in Mustafu. What were you doing? Kage flinched, looking up to meet his pink-haired friend's gaze. Mei Hatsum might have only been 5 feet 2 inches, but at that moment, it felt like she was towering over Kage, a scowl on her usually bright face. Kage had met Mei by complete accident, but it was probably one of the best accidents of his life. On one of his first patrols, he had heard a loud bang and seen smoke coming from an apartment window. Going to check it out, he had found Mei with her pink hair slightly singed, a crazy smile on her face. That had been the start of the only relationship Kage needed in his life. Mei had basically adopted Kage as her little brother, even though they were the same age, and they often hung out when Mei didn't have school. When Kage had come to her with a request for better gear, she had been all too happy to help out. She was also the only person who knew his real name and was allowed to see his face. Izu, answer me. What were you doing that you got hurt? Izuku sighed, leaning back on Mei's bed. He had finished stitching his side a few minutes ago, and Mei had thankfully waited until after he was done to get mad at him. I don't know. Maybe I just wanted to save someone like me. He glared right back at her, his scowl visible since he had taken off his mask and goggles. Mei sighed, plopping into a chair and spinning to face her work desk. Izuku knew that Mei wanted to go to UA, and he would be surprised if she didn't make it in. She was brilliant and already so good at making support gear. All of his gear was made by her, from his electric Eskrima sticks to his green butterfly knives to his attachable boot spikes. She had even made it all so it matched Izuku's vigilante outfit, a dark green hoodie, black cargo breeds, black mask, and his signature red high tops. Mei began tinkering with his mask, and Izuku walked over to see what she was working on. Her work desk was messy like the rest of her room, scattered with different ideas and blueprints. Currently, she seemed to be fiddling with the voice modifier she had added to his mask, adjusting the voice modulator. Izuku sat down in the other chair next to her, carefully putting away all of his medical supplies in one of Mei's drawers. Just because she was messy didn't mean that he couldn't keep his things neat. Oh, by the way, Mei said, glancing up briefly at him. My parents are going to be gone again for about 3 weeks, so if you're going to insist on coming through my bedroom window, try doing it then. Izuku blinked at her before letting out a small snort. Mei's parents were hardly home to begin with, but to make it even better, they went on week-long business trips. This gave Mei plenty of free time, which she mostly spent tinkering and experimenting. Thanks for telling me. If I feel like needing help anytime soon, I'll let you know. Mei grumbled something under her breath before turning back to her work. Izuku was pretty sure she wasn't talking about him. He stood up, walking back over to Mei's bed to put his shoes back on. Mei spun around in her chair, tossing his mask to him. Think fast. Izuku didn't think fast. The mask smacked against his chest and fell heavily into his lap. He looked up and glared at Mei before they both burst out laughing. Reaching down, Izuku picked up the mask and slipped it onto his face, adjusting it a bit so it lined up with his goggles. He smiled at Mei before standing up and hopping out her window. Wind whistled in his ears as he fell, pulling out his grappling hook and shooting almost straight up. Right before he would have hit the ground, Kage shot upwards, gripping tightly to his grappling hook. He shot past Mei's window, waving at her. She smiled and made a playful gesture before closing her window and walking back to her desk. Yup, she was a great friend. Though he was tired, Kage knew he couldn't ask Mei for anything else tonight. So he headed back to his own apartment, his side stinging with every flying leap to the next building. The pain was familiar, reminding him of all the other nights he had spent hopping around Mustafu, taking down villains. Kage really didn't know what he would have done with his life if he hadn't decided to become a vigilante. The words from the past came back to him suddenly, and he inwardly cringed at them. He didn't like remembering the time before, it was too painful. But sometimes memories would slip in unbidden, making him want to claw them out. Kaken. That was a name Kage hadn't heard in a while. He wondered how the angry blonde was doing. The last time they had seen each other, Bakugo had said some harsh things. Maybe he had improved since then, but Kage doubted it. No one could change that much. I ran into your little vigilante last night. Tsukachi choked on his coffee. He glanced up, but Aizawa's face was completely serious. Tsukachi glanced down at the case file he had been looking over before the hero had interrupted him. It just so happened to be Kage's. There wasn't much in the file, just a few testimonies from people that the vigilante had saved. None of them had been able to give any kind of description of Kage apart from his eyes. Tsukachi turned his attention back to Aizawa, who was now sitting in the chair across from the detective's desk. He looked even more tired than normal, though how that was possible was a mystery. He clearly hadn't gotten any sleep the night before. So, Tsukachi sat forward in his chair, pushing Kage's case file to the side. Tell me what happened. Aizawa sighed. Nothing really. I heard fighting, but when I got to the alley, the fight was over. I saw a figure in a dark green hoodie and black breeds kneeling next to a girl. I tried to take him in peacefully, but he got away. I wasn't even able to grab him with my capture scarf. He scowled, glancing down at the case file. Did you see what his face looked like? Any distinctive features? Aizawa shook his head. No. He had a black mask on and green goggles. He had his hood up over his hair, so I couldn't even see the color of it. He was kind of short, and I think he was using a voice modifier. Aizawa stopped when they both noticed a quiet buzzing. Aizawa reached down and pulled his phone out of his pocket, glancing at the caller ID before frowning. It's Nizu. I should probably take this, it might be important. Tsukachi nodded, gesturing to the door. Just notify me if you run into Kage again. Aizawa stood up and left. Tsukachi scribbled a few notes down on a piece of paper, noting the things that Aizawa had seen. Slipping the paper into the case file, he sighed and leaned back into his chair. In 3 years, he had not seen the vigilante, but now they had something. A real sighting, and it was from a credible source. Maybe Kage was getting rusty. What is it? Aizawa asked as he left the police station and walked down the street toward a cafe he frequented. He hadn't received any calls from Nizu in a while, so whatever the principal had to say was probably important. Aizawa, I hope you remembered that the UA entrance exam is in a few weeks, Nizu said. Aizawa sighed. Of course I remember, Nizu. Is that the only reason you called? Of course not. I heard that you had an encounter with our local vigilante last night. Aizawa opened his mouth, about to ask how Nizu knew, but he stopped himself. Nizu had his ways, and it was best not to question them. Nizu continued, I was hoping you could try to get in contact with him. I thought it would be interesting to have a chat. Aizawa froze, about to push open the cafe door. You want me to track down Japan's most wanted vigilante, someone who has only been seen once, so that you can have a chat with him? Nisa's voice was far too cheerful for Aizawa's liking. Yes. Aizawa sighed as he sat down at one of the cafe's booths. I'll try, but I can't promise you anything. Thank you. I expect I will be seeing you soon. Bye. Aizawa hung up and put his phone back in his pocket with a scowl. How was he supposed to get in contact with Kage? He had no leads and no ideas on how to get them. But he knew he couldn't do anything without proper caffeine. What can I get for you? Aizawa glanced up at the boy standing in front of him. He was short with curly green hair that fell into his face, just covering his dark green eyes. His skin was pale, and he had a splattering of freckles across his cheeks. His smile was warm and open, but it felt a little off. Aizawa ignored it. He had seen this same teenager here before, and the vibe he gave off was always the same. Happy, a little nervous, and very closed off. Izuku, can you close up tonight, please? I have to get home to help Kei with his homework, Yui, his manager, called out. Izuku glanced to see Yui looking at him with pleading eyes. He sighed, smiling at her. Of course I can. How could I possibly say no to you? Yui laughed and headed toward the front door, tossing a set of keys to him. Izuku caught them and waved as Yui left, the door's bell tinkling behind her. It was true that Izuku probably wouldn't be able to say no to Yui, considering she was the reason he had a place to stay. When he had been looking for an apartment, she had been kind enough to let him stay in the small living area upstairs from her cafe. She let him stay for free, and in return, he helped her run the cafe. He really did owe her a lot. Smiling to himself, Izuku locked up the cafe, turning off the lights before heading upstairs to his apartment. It was small, only a bedroom and a small bathroom, but it was enough for him. Yui really was the best. She never asked questions about his past, and she never pestered him about school. Izuku walked over to his closet, where he kept all his vigilante gear. He pulled it out, slipping it all on, yawning loudly. He really needed a good night's sleep, but he wasn't going to get it tonight. Tonight he had work to do. Please remind me why you're freaking out? Mei asked, her eyes shining with excitement. Izuku pulled back with a frown. Mei's smile was a little too manic for his taste. Because the UA entrance exam is in 5 days. And that means I have 5 days to WHP up some new inventions to impress the examiners. Izuku groaned, flopping back onto Mei's bed. He had seen this version of Mei several times, and every time he regretted being present for it. But he couldn't exactly leave her alone in this state. She might blow up her whole apartment complex. Izuku, you have to help me with this. I can't do all this work all by myself. Mei exclaimed, hopping out of her chair and running over to him. Izuku yelled, jumping to his feet. The bed was too soft and he lost his footing, falling onto the floor. He heard Mei laughing at him, but he just lay on the ground, throwing out his arms to either side of him. Oh, you mentioned that you ran into a hero the other day. Mei sat up, glancing down at where Izuku lay on the floor. Who was it? What happened? I want to know everything. Izuku sighed, sitting up. Don't you want my help with your new projects? Mei smirked and stood up, walking back over to her desk. She sat down in her chair and spun around in circles, smiling mischievously. Oh, but you would be helping by telling me the story. Besides, it's not like you would actually be all that helpful in making anything. Izuku snorted, leaning back against Mei's bed and pulling his legs up to his chest. She wasn't wrong. He wasn't particularly good at building things. He was smart, but his brain seemed to be hardwired for strategy, not technology. He sighed. It would probably just be easier to tell her the story. Well, I was busy saving this girl, so I didn't notice Eraserhead. Who? Izuku frowned. Of course Mei didn't know who Eraserhead was. She wasn't obsessed with heroes like him. Eraserhead is an underground pro hero. His quirk erases other people's quirks. Izuku suddenly thought back to his encounter with Eraser. Oh, so that's what he was doing. Mei gave him a questioning glance, so he explained. When I saw him, his hair was all floaty and his eyes were glowing. He must have been trying to erase my quirk. Too bad there isn't one to erase. Anyway, I left the girl there with him. I figured she'd be safe with a pro around. Mei whistled. So it seems like you're getting clumsy. Izuku stared at her, confused and annoyed. Why would you say that? Well, this was the first time you were seen by anyone, let alone a pro. That means you're getting sloppy. She smirked at him. Or old. Hey, I'm younger than you, aren't I? Mei shrugged, turning back to her work, but Izuku's mind was drifting. Maybe he was getting sloppy. Maybe he had gotten so used to going unnoticed that he had become careless. He promised himself he would be more careful in the future. He failed at being more careful. Kage had been doing his normal night patrol when he nearly ran straight into Eraserhead. Now he was being chased across the rooftops of Mustafu, trying to outrun the pro hero. It wasn't working too well. Hey, geez, slow down, I just want to talk. Kage froze, almost toppling off of a rooftop. He quickly fixed his footing, straightening up before jumping to the next roof. He stopped and turned back to face Eraser. What? He didn't know if it was safe to trust Eraser, but Kage admitted he was curious about what he had to say. He stood for a few seconds, waiting for Eraserhead to speak. Nizu wants to talk to you. He wants you to meet him at UA on the day of the entrance exam. Please at least consider his offer. He is very eager to meet you. Kage's mind spun. Nizu? The UA principal wanted to talk to him? Of course he was interested. But was it safe? He looked Eraserhead in the eyes before speaking. I'll think about it. Then he forced a smile on his face, even though no one could see it under his mask. He raised his hand in a mock salute before turning and running across the rooftop of the apartment building he was standing on. Kage jumped off the other end, landing and rolling, coming up running. He made his way back to his apartment, making sure Eraser hadn't tried to follow him. He would have liked to have finished his patrol, but his mind was too full of possibilities. Climbing through his bedroom window, he pulled off his gear, deciding to sleep on it. He would make a plan in the morning. UA was a very imposing school. The front gate towered over Izuku's head as he walked under it, conscious of people's eyes on him as he passed them. This was to be expected, since he was dressed in his vigilante gear. He ignored the people around him and picked up his pace, heading for the main building. After entering the school, Kage realized something. He didn't actually know where Nizu's office was. Before he could panic, he turned a corner and ran into none other than Eraserhead. Kage took a step back, glaring at the hero. Eraserhead just sighed. I take it you're lost. Kage stayed silent. Eraser sighed again before waving for Kage to follow him. They walked in silence for a few minutes before they reached a large door labeled Examiner's Room. Walking through the door, Kage noticed the other heroes in the room. Midnight was leaning against a wall, chatting with Present Mike, who was sitting on a couch next to Snipe. I'm glad you could make it. All heads turned towards the door as Nizu smiled at Kage. The other teachers were silent, staring at him in confusion. Nizu seemed to notice this and turned his smile towards them. My dear faculty, you might have heard of the Vigilante Kage. He's been causing quite a bit of trouble for our local police force as of late. The other teachers stared at him a moment longer before bursting into conversation, filled with mutterings of confusion. Kage ignored them. He didn't have time for this. Walking over to Nizu, he stood in front of the principal, ping an eyebrow under his goggles. Can you please get to the part of why you wanted me here so I can leave? Already? In truth, Kage would have liked to stay and watch the exams, but he didn't like being around Nizu. He knew that the principal was ridiculously smart, and he could already feel Nizu's brain working, trying to figure him out. So that's what this was. Nizu wanted to figure him out. This was a game to him. Kage frowned at the rat creature. If it was a game, he wanted no part in it, especially if the prize was his identity. Clearing his throat, he sat down in a chair across from the principal, not taking his eyes off of the mammal in front of him. Nizu just smiled. I asked you here today because I have an offer for you. Kage raised an eyebrow. What could this rat possibly think he could give him? Nizu continued, ignoring the vigilante's expression. In the past, UA's Hero Corps students have been. Nizu frowned with distaste. Lacking. Kage couldn't help it. He let out a snort that got garbled in his voice modifier. When Nizu looked at him curiously, he shook his head, smirking. Sorry, it's just that lacking is an understatement. Didn't Eraserhead expel his whole class last year? Nizu hesitated before nodding. Just, how you know this, I don't know, but I'm not going to ask right now. What I want from you is teaching. Kage looked at him, confused. Teaching? I know you are very good at what you do, Nizu continued, smiling slightly. I was wondering if you would be interested in helping out the Hero Corps students with their training, specifically the first years. I think there are some promising students this year, but it would be so helpful if we had someone with your experience helping them. Too many heroes in training rely too heavily on their quirks in combat. I think you could help them improve tremendously. Kage frowned, considering. It was an interesting offer. After about a minute of thinking it over, he made up his mind. Fine, but I have a few requests. Nizu nodded, evidently pleased that he had been convinced so quickly. Go ahead. First, the mask stays on at all times. I don't feel like revealing myself to everyone in the school. Nizu nodded, so Kage continued. Second, no personal questions from you. I don't want you nosing around in my business. This time, Nizu hesitated for a moment before nodding. Kage sighed. And finally, I want to continue being able to do my nightly patrols. I don't want the people in this city to suffer while I get to sit around teaching high school kids. Nizu frowned, but he didn't object. He nodded before turning to the big screen that took up the front wall of the examiner's room. Suddenly, a loud boom was heard from outside, making Kage jump. He turned to the screen and saw smoke rising from one of the exam sites. After a moment, a figure emerged from the smoke, his eyes gleaming. His all-too-familiar smile made Kage shiver. This wasn't good. Of all the people who could be trying out for Yue, why did it have to be him? Why did it have to be Kaken? It had been nice once, filled with jokes and laughter and bakugo, but now it was lonely. At least it meant that he wasn't being harassed or hurt. A scream cut through his thoughts. Izuku looked up and saw a pillar of smoke rising from a house a few blocks away. His house. Izuku started sprinting, running as fast as he could. What had happened? Had it been an accident? A villain? He rounded the corner and was faced with a horrifying sight. His whole house was on fire. In front of his house stood a villain and Endeavor. He stood in shock, watching as Endeavor arrested the villain and took him away, not even trying to put out the fire. Izuku heard sirens in the distance, but he ignored them, sprinting into the burning house. Where was his mom? The kitchen was filled with smoke. Izuku pulled up his shirt to cover his mouth, coughing. He quickly moved through the house, looking for any sign of his mother. He finally made it to her room. His eyes widened as he saw the green-haired figure lying on the floor, coughing. He rushed forward, but before he could get to her, he heard an echoing creak. Before he could react, part of the ceiling crumbled and collapsed right on top of his mother. Izuku stood there in horror, watching as blood slowly pooled out from under the rubble. A sob escaped his throat, and he collapsed to the floor, tears rolling down his face as smoke filled his lungs. He sat there on the ground as fire raged all around him. He didn't notice his burning clothes or the searing pain as flames licked at his skin, leaving scorching burns behind. He didn't notice when a hand gripped his shoulder, lifting him up and carrying him from his burning home. He didn't notice being placed in an ambulance or being rushed to the hospital. He didn't see the Bakugos as they came by to see him. He was trapped inside his own head, watching as his mother died over and over in front of him. He had been helpless. He hadn't even been able to save one person. He had been too weak. Izuku was released from the hospital a week later with burns covering his arms and back. His voice would forever be slightly scratchy from the amount of smoke he had breathed, but the doctors told him it could have been much worse. That was the last day that anyone had laid eyes upon Izuku Midoriya. 9 months later, people started reporting a mysterious person hopping around the city, taking down criminals and villains alike. No one knew who he was. No one knew what he looked like. The police started calling him Kage after his first note and glitter bomb had appeared. And from that point on, Kage had been a normal part of Mustafa life. Sometimes someone would notice a humanoid shadow outside their window, but when they would go to check it out, there would be nothing there. Kage remembered Bakugo. But did Bakugo remember Izuku? Did he remember the little green-haired boy whose eyes had shone like the sun? The little freckled boy he had bullied for so many years? The boy he had told to give up? Of course he wouldn't remember. Izuku had been such a small part of Bakugo's life, there was no reason he would ever think about him. No reason that he would look twice at every teenager with green hair he passed, thinking for a second that it was his long-lost friend. No reason he would inwardly cringe every time he used his explosions, remembering the feeling of hurting someone with them. There was no reason Kaken would remember his Deku. Finally, the exams came to an end. It was no surprise to Kage that Bakugo had managed to score in the top 3, but it did make him feel uneasy. There would be no avoiding Bakugo now. Not with Kage helping teach the Hero Corps students. But it wasn't like Kaken would recognize him. Nothing could possibly go wrong. You're doing what? Kage pulled the phone away from his ear, grimacing. He had been waiting as long as he could to tell Mei about his new job, because he knew she would act like this. Once she stopped yelling, he put the phone back up to his ear with a sigh. I am going to be helping train the Hero Corps students this year. I've already explained this 5 times. You don't need to destroy my eardrums. There was a moment of silence before Mei huffed. Fine. This is gonna be so fun though. We'll be able to see each other every day now. Once I make it into the UA support course, I can make you new gear too. Kage smiled, gazing out at the city around him. Sitting on the edge of a rooftop might have been a bad idea for a normal person, but Kage was not normal. The city around him was pretty quiet, save for a few cars driving slowly by. Below him, he hadn't even seen that many criminals that night, which was strange, but not unheard of. He had had nights where there hadn't been any crime at all. If he was being honest, Kage found it nice not having to do anything life-threatening for a day. He just got to sit outside, talking with his friend, enjoying the night. We have a problem. Shigaraki sighed, turning to the new voice. The bar he was in was dark, lit only by a few flickering lights mounted in the corners. He was slouched over the counter, an empty glass in his hand. The man standing in the doorway was tall, with black hair spiked in every direction. The strangest thing about him were the scars that covered his face and arms. Shigaraki sighed again, gripping his empty glass harder. Of course it was Dabi that would bring bad news. What is it? Dabi seemed to be trying to catch his breath, and Shigaraki waited impatiently, tapping his fingers on the counter. After a minute, Dabi straightened up, breathing heavily. It's that kid. Shigaraki froze, his tapping fingers pausing in midair. He knew the kid Dabi was referring to, the one who had been a thorn in his side for almost a year. The only kid who had ever escaped from the League. Midoriya. What about him? Shigaraki's voice was harsh, his gaze piercing through Dabi. The taller villain looked at him, evidently trying to regain his composure after apparently running all the way here to deliver this news. He's going to be at UA this year. Shigaraki's chair squeaked against the ground as he jumped to his feet, the empty glass in his hand disintegrating. What? Dabi took a step back, looking nervous. Then another voice rang out, making both men turn towards the speaker. She was a short girl with dangerous eyes, her blonde hair pulled back in messy buns. When she smiled, her sharp canines flashed in the dim light. This is a good thing, right? It means we can take out 2 annoyances at once. And we could probably do it all in one day. Shigaraki froze, thinking it over, before dropping back into his chair with a scowl. Toga was right. This was good news. Besides, all 3 of the villains had been hoping to run into the green-haired boy again. Fine, Shigaraki spat, glaring at both Dabi and Toga in turn. We'll continue as planned. It doesn't make any difference to me, and it might be easier this way anyway. Toga smiled again, hopping out of her chair and skipping over to the door that Dabi was still standing in. Well, if that's settled, I'll be leaving. You coming, Dabi? Dabi nodded, before turning to leave, Toga following behind him. Shigaraki turned back to the bar counter, reaching out for his glass before remembering. He grumbled a curse, sweeping the dust onto the ground. It is for the best this way. It will make our whole plan easier. Shigaraki glanced up at the translucent man in front of him. His eyes glowed yellow, and his body was purple, though it didn't have a very distinct shape. The disintegration villain scowled at the bartender. He knew that Kurogiri was right, but what if this messed everything up? What if the wretched teen interfered? What if Shigaraki couldn't end All Might? This caused an evil smile to slip onto his face. He didn't need to kill All Might. He didn't need to do anything. He would just get to sit back and watch the chaos unfold. This was going to be fun. It was quite funny to see the reactions of the different hero classes when a well-known vigilante walked into their classroom. Some people stared at him in shock, some tried to attack him with their quirks, while some just sat there, confused as to why everyone around them was freaking out. Kage had started with the third years, then the second years. He wasn't going to be helping them train, since they were already way too good at what they did, but Nizu had thought it would be good for him to see how the other classes were run before he went to the first years. Kage was glad for it though. He was dreading seeing the first years and was trying to put it off for as long as possible. But all too soon, he was standing in the first year wing, watching kids walk by on their way to classes. Luckily, his first class was going to be easy. Taking a deep breath, he walked through the door of Class 1H, where Kage was promptly greeted by a loud explosion. Coughing, he waved the smoke away from his face. He could guess who had caused the sudden upset. Glancing around, he spotted a familiar mop of pink hair. Mei was balanced precariously on a chair, trying not to fall as she meddled with what looked like support gear. What had caused the explosion he would never know, but Kage found the familiarity of Mei's chaos comforting. He walked over to her and tapped her on the shoulder lightly, barely containing a smile. "Hey, maybe don't blow up the whole school, okay?" Mei blinked at him for a moment before grinning mischievously. She had already promised him that she would pretend like she didn't know him, so he wasn't too worried about her spilling his identity. Despite what others might think, Mei was very good at keeping secrets, mainly because she enjoyed knowing things that others didn't. The pink-haired teenager hopped off the chair, still smiling, even though her face was covered in grime from the recent explosion. Winking conspiratorially at him, she turned and walked over to one of the work desks. Taking his attention off of Mei, Kage glanced around at the other dozen or so students in the classroom. None of them stood out to him, but a frown creased his face as he noticed someone was missing. Where was? The classroom door burst open, revealing a short man in the doorway. He looked normal enough, except for the large excavator claw on his head. Kage's frown dissipated. So this was Power Loader. The excavation hero walked into the classroom, smiling at the students. Then his eyes landed on Kage, and his smile widened. He walked over to the vigilante, reaching out a hand. After a moment's confusion, Kage took it, shaking it slightly. Power Loader's voice was cheerful when he spoke. "It's very nice to have you here, Kage. I hope you don't mind visiting my class for a bit." Kage smiled under his mask. "Of course not. It will be a nice break from the hero course." Out of the corner of his eye, the vigilante saw Mei smirk. They both knew all too well that Kage was not looking forward to the first-year hero course kids. Power Loader let go of his hand, walking to the front of the classroom and turning to face the students. "Since it's only the 5th day of class, you all can have a free work PRD. Work on projects you're interested in, just as long as they aren't too loud or dangerous." The hero shot a pointed look at Mei, who didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. After the students had started working, Power Loader turned back to Kage. "You can just walk around and watch the students work if you want." Kage nodded before turning away, walking around the classroom. He watched as 2 students fiddled with a small robot, making it fly around the room and shoot lasers at a girl who was working in a corner. The girl retaliated by blasting a substance at the robot from a cannon she had attached to her wrist. Kage smiled as the 3 started yelling, throwing things back and forth. Then he heard a voice behind him. "Sue, are you excited to see Class 1A?" Groaning inwardly, Kage turned to face Mei. She was back to fiddling with the support gear that she had blown up earlier, pulling out wires and adding sheets of thin metal. Her smirk was pure mischief, and her eyes gleamed with excitement. The vigilante sighed, plopping down in the chair next to her. None of the other kids seemed to be paying him any special attention, so he felt it was safe enough to talk with Mei. "I have no idea what you're talking about." Mei glared at him, almost smashing her finger with a hammer. She cursed, turning back to her work. You know that friend of yours? What did you call him? Kakaf. Bless you. The pink-haired girl whacked Kage on the back of the head with a wrench. The vigilante yelped, smacking her on the arm. She just laughed at him. His name is Bakugo, and no, I don't want to see him. Mei frowned, fidgeting with a wire. Really? Because you seemed pretty excited about it yesterday. Or were you just nervous? I still can't tell the difference between the two. Kage sighed again, resting his face in his hands. Why did Mei have to be so perceptive? It was true that he was nervous about seeing Bakugo again, but he had to admit to himself that there was some excitement too, even though Bakugo wouldn't know it was him. And he couldn't tell Bakugo that it was him. Not like Bakugo would remember him anyway. That thought both comforted and annoyed him. He wanted Bakugo to remember him, but why? It wasn't like they had ever really been friends, not since they were kids. And Kage had disappeared so long ago. Bakugo had probably forgotten about him. It was probably for the best anyway. All too soon, Kage was standing outside his last class of the day. Taking a deep breath, he pushed the classroom door open. Inside the room, 20 students were sitting in chairs, all in even rows of 5. Out of the corner of his eye, Kage saw a boy with spiky blonde hair reading a book. The vigilante ignored him. At the head of the classroom stood Eraserhead. Eraser nodded to him before addressing the class. Class, this is Kage. He will be helping train you in non-quirk combat. Speaking of which, our other assistant teacher should be showing up shortly. Just then, a loud bang came from the door. Everyone turned to face the newcomer, and Kage felt his heart sink. Just when he thought his luck couldn't get any worse. I am here. It had to be All Might. All Might walked into the room, brushing right past Kage, who was trying to turn into a shadow. Why was All Might here? How could he possibly have such bad luck? Everyone in the classroom seemed to gravitate towards the hero, as if he was his own planet. Everyone loved All Might. He was the symbol of peace, after all. But Kage could never admire the blonde hero again. Not after that day. 10 years earlier, Izuku left the hospital with his arms wrapped in bandages. They did little to stop the pain that came with moving his arms, but at least they prevented people from staring at his burns. His vision was still a bit cloudy from the smoke, but the doctors assured him it would clear up in a few days. It made it hard to see where he was going, and when he ran straight into the number 1 hero, he didn't recognize him at first. Not until he heard the booming voice. Are you all right, young man? The voice vibrated through Izuku's head, causing him to step back, staring in wonder at his idol. All Might towered over him in his hero costume, his cape billowing in the non-existent wind. His smile was so wide that it took up half of his face. It was no wonder villains were scared of him. Izuku blinked the sun out of his eyes, staring up at All Might. I'm fine, he mumbled, looking down at his shoes. Any other day he would have been delighted to run into his favorite hero, but not today. A plan was already forming in his head, a plan that no hero could know about. A vigilante plan. Well, I'm glad to hear that. You have a good day now. All Might turned to leave, and an idea came to Izuku. Wait, All Might. He ran after him as the pro turned back to face him, stopping. What is it? Do you want my autograph? Izuku froze, trying to figure out how to phrase his question. Finally he spoke. Is it possible for someone to become a hero without a quirk? Though All Might's smile remained, his face became a little sad. He looked down at the green-haired boy with pity in his eyes. Izuku hated pity. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. No. I'm sorry. Then he turned and disappeared into the sky, leaving the small boy to stare after him, tears welling up in his eyes. In the present day, Aizawa had ushered his class outside to ground beta, where they were spread out in a line. The hobo hero walked down the line, reading out each person's name and quirk for the benefit of the 2 assistants. Bakugo almost snorted. Here he was, faced with All Might, his favorite hero, yet the short guy next to him seemed to be getting more attention. There was something familiar about him, but Bakugo ignored it. He had never met the vigilante, only ever hearing stories about him from his friends. Honestly, the explosive blonde was unimpressed. He had expected someone bigger, not a skinny guy. And his outfit could use some work. A hoodie and briefs? Seriously? His gear, though, intrigued Bakugo. It looked professionally done, and he doubted Kage had the supplies to make it, so where had he gotten it? Who had willingly helped a wanted vigilante by making them support gear? A crazy person, no doubt. When Aizawa called Bakugo's name, he thought he saw Kage flinch, but when he glanced over, the vigilante looked completely normal. It was probably just a trick of the light. Finally, Aizawa finished his list and stepped back, facing all of the students. Bakugo turned his attention to his teacher, momentarily forgetting about the vigilante. Today we will be doing combat training. Each of you will go against either Kage on your own, or All Might with a partner. I will be assigning you your opponent and your partner, if you need one. Bakugo scoffed. He could beat All Might all by himself. He was amazing after all. But in the end he was assigned to fight Kage. He also had to go last. The explosive blonde watched in boredom as the pairs went first. Pinky and Shitty Hair lost to All Might, as did Headphones and Dunce Face. After the partners were done, the first few of Kage's opponents went. Surprisingly, no one managed to beat him, even though he didn't seem to use a quirk. The only person who came close to beating him was Darkness, but even he lost. Finally, it was Bakugo's turn. He walked over to the area he was supposed to be in. Stepping into the arena circle, Bakugo observed his opponent. There was definitely something familiar about the vigilante, but he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Under the mask, Kage seemed to smile at him. Or smirk, it was hard to tell. The vigilante wouldn't meet his eyes, and it annoyed Bakugo to no end. He would beat this extra, and he would do it without even breaking a sweat. Suddenly, a voice broke through Bakugo's train of thought. Well, may the best hero win, Bakugo scowled at the vigilante, who still wouldn't look straight at him. Whatever. Kage was annoyingly good. He managed to dodge every single one of Bakugo's explosions, and he didn't even seem to be trying that hard. This infuriated Bakugo to no end. No one had ever been able to avoid his attacks for this long. Finally, the angry blonde managed to land a hit, if it was purely by accident. He had been charging straight at Kage when the vigilante suddenly jumped straight up. On a whim, Bakugo raised his hands and blasted his explosions over his head. He heard a hiss, and when he turned, he saw Kage on his knees, holding his right arm with his left. It seemed that Bakugo had managed to hit him, but only on the arm. When Kage let go of his right arm, however, Bakugo was struck by the amount of burn scars that laced his skin. His hoodie sleeve had partially burned away, revealing the bare skin of his forearm, and there were too many scars to count. Almost all of them looked like they were burns, but there were a couple that looked like they had been from blades. Bakugo was so distracted by Kage's arm that he didn't even notice when the vigilante stood up and walked over to him, pushing him back a few steps. Bakugo stumbled, glaring up at Kage, but the masked guy only stared back. He was finally meeting his eyes. And there was a familiar look in them, one that Bakugo couldn't quite place. "You're out of bounds." Kage's voice was flat as he turned and walked away, leaving a stunned Bakugo in his wake. He had lost? And it had been over so quickly. Why had he let himself get distracted by the scars? If he was being honest with himself, the scars had reminded him of someone else. An old friend he hadn't seen in years. Bakugo remembered that day at the hospital. "We're going to visit Izuku." Bakugo jumped up from his spot on the couch, his homework completely forgotten. He had been waiting for 3 days for news of Deku, and now he was finally able to go see him. He always felt a weight in his chest whenever he thought about the green-haired boy. Bakugo had so much he wished he could say to him, but he was always too much of a coward to say it. To apologize. They got to the hospital around noon, and it was surprisingly busy for a weekend. Apparently, the villain who had caused all of the trouble for the Midoriyas had managed to ruin a few other lives before getting caught. Bakugo's fists clenched. He could still feel the heat of the flames on his skin, the strange burning sensation very similar to his own quirk. He hadn't gotten much sleep over the last few days because every time he closed his eyes, the image of Izuku sitting in the burning doorway of his mother's room was burned into his eyelids. He couldn't shake Izuku's expression from his head, no matter how hard he tried. He entered Izuku's hospital room, walking a little behind his mother. The green-haired boy was sitting in a hospital bed, dressed in a t-shirt and sweats, his hair a mess of curls. Bakugo barely noticed the burns and scars on his arms, though he would probably be seeing them in his dreams for weeks. All the blonde could see were Izuku's eyes. They were so big. Numbly, Bakugo watched as the freckled boy turned to face them. He didn't seem to really see them. It was as if he was looking through them, like they weren't even there. The blonde boy shivered, taking a step forward. He reached out his hand, not sure what exactly he was going to do, but Izuku flinched back, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Bakugo felt guilt well up inside him like a flood, swallowing him whole. He tried to meet Izuku's gaze, but the green-haired boy wouldn't look at him. Bakugo opened his mouth to apologize, to say sorry, to say something, but nothing came out. Then he felt a tug on his wrist, and he looked up to see his mom's face smiling down at him sadly. Maybe now wasn't a great time to come by. Don't worry, we can come back and see him soon. Bakugo just nodded, but his mind was at war. He couldn't leave yet. He hadn't apologized. He hadn't said he was sorry for all the horrible things he had done. He hadn't even been able to acknowledge them. Numbly, he followed his mother out of the hospital and back into her car. Their drive home was silent, everything that hadn't been said hanging in the air between them. Bakugo tried to shake off the feeling of unease as the hospital disappeared behind him. He would have another chance. He would see Izuku again soon, and he would have another chance. His chance never came. A few days later, Bakugo's mother got a call from the hospital. Izuku had been released, and he had been seen heading in the direction of their house. Mitsuki waited by the door, a smile on her face, with Bakugo sitting next to her. They waited for hours. Izuku never came. No one had seen him since. Kage pressed a hand to his side, where his stitches were stretched over sore skin. He should have been more careful during their training, but he had fallen back into his regular pattern, defeating each of his opponents. But at what cost? Eraserhead seemed to notice his discomfort, asking if he was all right, but the vigilante waved him off. The last thing he needed was to be stuck in the hospital again for something as trivial as busted stitches. The class continued as it normally did, with Kage observing from the side. All Might had disappeared, and Eraser had paired all of the students up for sparring. The vigilante couldn't help but watch Bakugo. He was sparring with a redhead that Kage remembered as Kirishima, but the angry blonde seemed to be calling him shitty hair. The vigilante snorted to himself. That was a very Kaken thing to do. Eraser kept giving him funny looks for the rest of the day, and when the class finally ended and the students had been dismissed, the teacher approached Kage slowly. You should go see Recovery Girl. You're in pain. Kage frowned at him. He was definitely not going to go see Recovery Girl. I'm perfectly fine. I don't need a doctor. He tried to stand up, but he felt a few of the stitches in his side rip. He stumbled and Eraser caught him. Kage pressed a hand to his side, already feeling blood staining the side of his hoodie. Why today of all days? He tried to wave the hero off, but his head was already spinning. He felt Eraser pick him up, and then he was in the air, flying towards the main building of UA. Of course, this meant it was the perfect time for him to pass out. Izuku was engulfed in fire, unable to breathe. The room around him was dark, but right in front of him was a pool of dark liquid. Blood. A figure rose out of the pool, covered from head to toe in blood. The only thing Izuku could make out were her bright green eyes. They shone far too brightly, filling him with dread. Then the figure spoke. You could have saved me. You could have helped me. But you were useless. You failed. You were weak. The blood around the figure's feet started to boil, rising up and swallowing the room. It rolled over Izuku, filling his mouth with the taste of metal. He tried to breathe, but blood rolled down his throat, filling his lungs. He choked on it, trying to swim. He was suspended in the blood that had taken over the room. He couldn't see, he couldn't hear, and all the while fire raged along his skin, seeming to be powered by the blood. He was drowning. And it was all his fault. Kage sat up with a gasp, his vision slowly coming back. He was in an unfamiliar room, and as he looked around, his panic rose. It looked like a hospital. He hated hospitals. The vigilante tried to stand up, but his whole body was shaking. His clothes were soaked through with sweat, and he was shivering uncontrollably. In the back of his mind, he realized he was probably having a panic attack. That wasn't good. He pushed his back up against a wall, trying to breathe. Distantly, Kage heard the door to the hospital room open, footsteps coming towards him quickly. He tried to breathe. He couldn't breathe. Panicked, Kage reached up and ripped the mask from his face, taking in deep gulps of air. At some point, he had lost his goggles, and his face was now bare for the newcomer to see. He didn't care. He just needed to be free. The vigilante felt a hand on his shoulder, and he looked up to see Eraser, Aizawa kneeling next to him, looking confused and worried. His voice broke through the noise in Kage's head, calming him down. "It's okay. You're safe. Just breathe." The green-haired boy let out a shaky laugh. He was trying to breathe. Couldn't Aizawa see that? After a few moments, Izuku's heart rate calmed down, his breathing returning to normal. He slid to the floor, numbly fingering the mask in his hand. Aizawa seemed to notice for the first time that the vigilante's face was bare, his hood pushed back to reveal his mess of green curls. That probably wasn't good. "So what do you think his quirk is?" Bakugo sighed, letting his head fall onto the table in front of him. His friends had been discussing Kage in the common room for almost 30 minutes, and it seemed they had finally come to him for input. He turned his head slightly to look at Shitty Hair and Pinky, who were smiling at him expectantly. He scowled back. "Why should I waste my time trying to figure out what some extra's quirk is? It doesn't matter anyway." Shitty Hair frowned, but Pinky just rolled her eyes, turning to where Mind FK and Dunce's face were sitting on the couch. The purple-haired boy looked like he was asleep, his head resting on Dunce's face's shoulder. The electrical boy smirked at Bakugo before turning his attention back to the others. "Maybe it's a mental quirk, like Shin's? Something that wouldn't really be noticeable in a fight." Pinky nodded, sitting down on the arm of a chair. Shitty Hair sat down in the part of the chair actually meant for sitting. The redhead seemed to be deep in thought. Finally, he spoke, causing the other two to look at him. "What if he doesn't have a quirk?" The alien-looking girl frowned, considering, before shaking her head. "Do you really think someone without a quirk could be that good?" "Yes." Bakugo had not meant to speak out loud, but the words slipped from his lips. He scowled as his three friends turned towards him, expressions ranging from confused, Dunce's face, to curious, Pinky. Pinky walked over to him, propping her head on her elbows on the table. She smiled at him mischievously. "And how would you know, Baku bitch? You have any close friends who are quirkless?" Dunce's face snorted. "Baku bro? Friends? That's something I'd like to see." Bakugo shot him a glare before turning back to Pinky, a scowl on his face. "No." Then, under his breath, he muttered, "Not anymore." The pink-skinned girl frowned but didn't push the topic, turning back to the other two. "Well, I think he must have some kind of agility quirk. Otherwise, how was he able to outmaneuver everyone so effortlessly?" She jumped up onto the couch next to Dunce's face, causing him to jolt awake. She spoke in an imperial tone, her hands firmly planted on her hips. "Whatever his quirk is, I vow to figure it out." Of course, her bold statement then turned into a bet. $20 you can't figure it out by the end of the year. Pinky smirked, reaching out to shake the electric boy's hand. The insomniac next to him shook his head, and Bakugo shared his feeling of weary defeat. Kaminari never won bets. The four of them then started arguing, and Bakugo stopped listening. He turned back to his homework, groaning. But no matter how much he tried, he couldn't get the thought of Kage out of his head. What if he really was quirkless? It wasn't too hard to believe. It would explain why he needed so much support gear too. Bakugo pushed all the thoughts from his head, focusing his attention on his math. When Pinky figured out what the vigilante's quirk was, she would no doubt tell him and everyone else. He doubted it would take her very long to figure it out either. Give it 3 weeks. Aizawa frowned down at the vigilante next to him. It was hard to see the teenager as Kage anymore, not once the hobo hero had seen his face. The green-haired kid had looked so panicked when he realized he didn't have his mask on that Aizawa felt a pang of sympathy for him. He wanted to treat Kage like one of his students, but something told him that the vigilante wouldn't appreciate it. "Well, since it turns out you're the same age as my students, it seems only right for you to live in the dorms with them. The large dorm building stood in front of them, a big sign on the front that read Class 1. Kage gulped, looking up at the building worriedly. Aizawa could sense panic rising inside the green-haired boy, but he couldn't figure out why. Don't worry. You won't have to take your mask off if you don't want to. All of them will still think you're an adult. Numbly, Kage nodded, giving himself a small shake before walking into the dorm building. It was empty since the 1A kids were in class, and this fact seemed to calm the vigilante down. Maybe he didn't want to confront the students. Kage didn't want to confront the students. Especially a certain angry blonde. Quickly, Kage climbed up the stairs and onto the bedroom levels. There was one empty room at the end of the hall, and when he swung the door open, the vigilante was greeted by his bedroom. He blinked, walking in and turning in a circle. The room exactly mirrored his room at the cafe. Even his extra medical supplies were placed neatly in a corner next to his bed. He turned to Aizawa, throwing an accusing look at the hero. How did you even what? Aizawa smiled slyly. I have my ways. Kage frowned but didn't question it. He shoved Aizawa out of the room, shutting the door behind him. Then he got to work. He hadn't showered in at least 2 days, and his clothes were still stained from his injuries. He only had one thought in his mind: get clean and get sleep. So he did. A day later, Kage was eating lunch in the teacher's lounge when an alarm went off. The other teachers around him stood up, confused. The vigilante turned to Aizawa, who was on his feet, heading towards the door to the school grounds. Kage followed behind him, curious about the cause of the commotion. When they reached the gates surrounding UA, Kage's eyes were drawn to the mob of cameramen and reporters at the entrance. Normally, there should have been a thick gate covering the wall's entrance, but for whatever reason, it wasn't there. Kage watched from a distance as Aizawa and a few other teachers got the mob to disperse. Then he noticed the ash. Walking forward, he knelt to examine it closer. His eyes widened. Only one person he knew could have been powerful enough to turn the whole gate to dust. Kage stood up, his eyes roaming over the surrounding city, trying to notice any signs of trouble. A purple portal closing around the figure of a man who was staring right at him. Kage started shaking, unable to pull his eyes away as the portal closed and disappeared. He felt a hand on his shoulder and looked up to see Aizawa frowning down at him, concerned. The vigilante quickly masked his expression, frowning right back at the hero. Aizawa opened his mouth to say something, but Kage cut him off. I'm fine. His voice was clipped and his expression unreadable as he turned away, heading back to the dorms. He had to plan a visit with someone and soon. I would say it's good to see you, Aizu, but I would be lying. Izuku snorted, sitting back in his chair. The man in front of him had dark black hair that fell into his face and slightly translucent skin. You know why I'm here? Jack nodded, pulling a fortune cookie out of his pocket. Izuku groaned. He didn't know what it was with Jack and passing on information through riddles, but it was starting to get old. The green-haired boy reached out, grabbing the fortune cookie before standing up and heading towards the restaurant's door. Jack's voice froze him in place. For what it's worth, none of us knew about the UA incident. Shigaraki didn't share that plan with us. Izuku nodded, not even bothering to look back at Jack. You three should be more careful, otherwise, you might get caught. After he exited the restaurant, he pulled the fortune cookie from his pocket, cracking it open and pulling out the small piece of paper inside. There was only one line on it. Is it irony or is it destiny? But the day where heroes rescue someone is the same day that they themselves need rescue. Izuku frowned, reading and rereading the words. This riddle was even less helpful than usual. He shoved the piece of paper back into his pocket, letting the crumbled fortune cookie in his hand fall to the ground. He pulled up his mask, strapping on his goggles. He would think about the riddle later. Right now, he had a job to do. Mustafu still needed a vigilante. Tsukachi here. The voice on the other end of the phone sounded more tired than usual. It's me. I have some news regarding your vigilante problem. Tsukachi sat up, suddenly more interested. He hadn't heard from Aizawa in almost a week, and he had started to worry. Not only that, but Kage himself seemed to be out and about less and less. What is it? There was a pause before Izawa spoke again. I know who he is. Izuku, can you please take care of the cafe for a little while? I need to pick up Kei from school. Izuku smiled at Yui, nodding slightly. The cafe wasn't crowded. There were only 2 people sitting at a table, drinking tea. He could handle it until Yui got back. His manager smiled at him before running out the door. The green-haired teenager turned around, expecting to hear the bell on the door ring as it closed, but the cafe was silent. Frowning, Izuku turned back around to face the front of the cafe, and his stomach dropped. Izawa was walking through the door, and right behind him was Tsukachi. Good morning. I think we need to talk. Tsukachi smiled warmly down at Izuku, but the freckled boy only nodded. He turned, waving them into the back room. This was going to be interesting. Once the door closed behind them, separating them from the rest of the cafe, Izuku whirled around to glare at Izawa. You told him? Izawa didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. He just frowned right back. Of course I told him. First of all, you're a wanted vigilante, and second, you're a kid. He needed to know. Izuku turned his glare to Tsukachi, who had sat down in a chair by the back desk. He was still smiling, but that didn't make the teenager feel any better. He walked around the detective, taking a seat behind the desk. Izawa sat in the chair next to Tsukachi, not taking his eyes off the small, green-haired boy. Whatever you have to say, get it over with. I have work to do. Tsukachi sighed, leaning forward in his chair. Izuku didn't want to meet his eyes, but he forced himself to anyway. The detective's smile was warm, almost fatherly, but that just made the teen more nervous. Hopefully, this would be done quickly. Tsukachi was surprised. Kage hadn't lied at all during their conversation, but he hadn't exactly been open. It had been a shock for the detective to learn that not only did Izawa know who the vigilante was, but that the person causing the police so much trouble was a kid, the same age as Izawa's students, actually. The detective looked over his notes before glancing at Izawa. The pro-hero's gaze was still fixed on the kid behind the desk, but he must have felt the other man's gaze because he turned to face him. So what now? Am I going to be arrested? Izuku's smile was weak, and his face looked worn. With each question, it was as though an extra weight had settled onto his shoulders, pushing him farther down in his chair. Tsukachi tried to smile at him, but he only received a frown in return. He sighed, shuffling the papers in his hands. No. The answer seemed to surprise both Izuku and Izawa. They both stared at him, confused. Tsukachi continued. First off, you're still underage, so even if I wanted to try to put you in prison, it probably wouldn't work. Second, you're quirkless, so we can't technically charge you with vigilantism, since that would require the use of a quirk, which you obviously don't have. Finally, both Mustafu and Yue still need you. It would be wrong of me to arrest you. I think, for now, I will just have to turn a blind eye. I just have one request from you. The teen perked up. It seemed as if the detective's statement had lightened the burden on him, if only a little. What is it? I want you to work towards getting a hero license. Izuku frowned. But how can I? I don't have a quirk. Tsukachi smiled. I think you'll manage. That's all I have for you for now. I expect we'll be in contact, Izuku. The green-haired boy looked shocked. How did you? I know a bit about the Midoriya case. I'm sorry about what happened, but I'm glad to know that you are all right. The detective offered his hand for the vigilante to shake. Hesitantly, Izuku took it, smiling slightly. Walking out of the cafe, Tsukachi let out a small laugh. Izawa gave him a questioning look. The detective just shook his head, smiling a little. So, after all this time, Izuku Midoriya is alive. What a pleasant surprise. Are they ready? Kurojairi inclined his head, purple smoke rising around him. Shigaraki smiled crookedly. Soon. I hope you're ready, heroes. The USJ was an impressive-looking building. The domed structure towered over Class 1A as they got off the bus, talking and laughing with each other. Kage got off last, following slowly behind Izawa. He didn't really want to be here, but he felt some responsibility for the kids in that class. Was it kind of weird since they were the same age? A little. As they entered the glass-covered dome, Kage noticed the rescue hero 13 standing in front of them. The vigilante might have internally freaked out a little. 13 was one of his favorite heroes. They had such a powerful quirk, and choosing to use it to rescue and save people was just, wow. Kage shook his head, trying to focus on what Aizawa was saying, but he kept getting distracted by the building around him. There were at least 7 different training areas, each with very different terrain. Kage saw a lake, some crumbled buildings, a mountain, and what looked like an old amusement park among them. Earlier, he hadn't been too eager about this trip, but now he found himself wishing he could train too. Something was bugging him. It was as if he had all the pieces to a puzzle, but he hadn't quite put them all in the right place yet. Oh well, he could figure out whatever it was later. It probably wasn't important right now. The extras were arguing again. Aizawa had stopped explaining the plan to them and was now walking around, separating everyone into groups. It was just Bakugo's luck that he was stuck with Dunce Face, Shitty Hair, and Pinky. Tape Face had been separated from them, and there had been a lot of dramatics before Aizawa finally managed to make them settle down by threatening to send them back to school. But now the 3 members of the recently named Baku Squad were arguing. What were they arguing about? Kage's quirk. I'm telling you, it's a mental quirk. Otherwise we would have seen something by now. Pinky huffed, glaring at Shitty Hair. No, it's something physical. Have you seen how he moves? It has to be an agility thing. I still don't understand why you guys don't think he could be quirkless. It would make sense. Both Pinky and Shitty Hair glanced over at Dunce's face. Then the alien-looking girl laughed. Cammy, how many quirkless people do you know? The electrical boy thought for a second before shaking his head. None. Just his luck. Pinky decided this was an excellent time to remember their conversation a few weeks ago. She walked over to Bakugo, placing a hand on his shoulder and smiling at him knowingly. Baku babe, you said you knew a quirkless person, right? What were they like? What was their name? The blonde glared at her for a moment before sighing. There was no point trying to dodge around the question. The pink-haired girl could worm anything out of someone. His name was Izuku. He was a childhood friend. Out of the corner of his eye, Bakugo thought he saw Aizawa stiffen, as though he had been listening, but when the blonde glanced over, Aizawa was making a beeline for the vigilante himself. Bakugo turned his attention back to Mina. She was frowning at him. Why do you make it sound like he's dead? He's not dead. The words came out harsher than he had meant, and he saw the pink-haired girl flinch back, confused. Bakugo tried to calm down. He remembered all too well the police officers that had come by with an official statement, saying that since it had been almost 3 months, they had to declare Izuku as dead. But he wasn't dead, he couldn't be. About 3 years ago. He didn't mention anything about the fact that Izuku was missing and presumed dead. He didn't want his friends to question him further about the incident. Mina seemed to understand that she had pushed too far. She nodded before turning and walking back over to the others, presumably to rejoin in the argument. Why didn't you tell me you knew Bakugo? Kage flinched, glancing over at Aizawa, who was glowering down at him. Damn it. He knew that the hero would probably find out eventually, but he still wasn't prepared for the annoyance in the teacher's eyes. Why would I? I just knew him when I was younger. He hasn't seen me in 3 years. He probably doesn't remember me. There's no need to worry. Aizawa just sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Fine. But you will be telling me the whole story later. Just then, the two heard people talking and yelling. Turning around, they noticed purple portals opening all around the students, and walking out of them was, oh God. Kage took a step back, and Aizawa glanced down at him. The vigilante knew he must have worn an expression of terror because the hero's eyes widened, glancing back at the villains pouring out of the portals in front of them. It seemed that anything that could scare Kage was something to be wary of. A man in a black sweatshirt and black breathes stepped forward. He looked normal enough, with his pale skin and light blue hair, but the normal parts of his appearance ended there. Up and down his arms, severed hands clung, and there was even one on his face. Sadly, Kage recognized him. How could he not? This was the man who had caused him so much pain. This was the man who had almost killed him more times than Kage could count. This was Shigaraki. Suddenly, something clicked for the vigilante. The lines from the fortune cookie, Is it irony or is it destiny? But the day where heroes rescue someone is the same day that they themselves need rescue. Jack had been trying to warn him about this attack, and he had completely failed to realize it. Shigaraki was monologuing. Kage was frozen in place, staring up at the nightmare in front of him, his mind spiraling into memories, and Shigaraki was monologuing. The vigilante shook his head, trying to clear it. He couldn't afford to spiral now. The students needed him. Stepping forward, he pushed his way through the class, who were all frozen in shock, staring at Shigaraki. When he got to the front of the group, he stood between them and the villains like a shield, glaring daggers at the blue-haired man. Shigaraki. The villain paused in the middle of his sentence, glancing down at Kage. The hand on his face covered his mouth, but somehow the vigilante could still sense the sneer there. Maybe this hadn't been the best idea. The students behind him started whispering to each other, but all of Shigaraki's attention had been turned towards Kage. Well, I was hoping to see you here, Zuzu. Kage flinched at the nickname. Of course, Shigaraki knew his real name, but for some reason he had always used that nickname, even while trying to confront the vigilante. Memories tugged at his mind, but Kage pushed them away. He had to focus. He had to protect the students. So we're using nicknames now, huh? Alright, Shiggy, then why don't you turn around, walk back through Kuri's portal, and forget that any of this happened, K? Shigaraki scowled down at him. Kage smiled. He had managed to annoy the villain. That was good. It meant that Shiggy hadn't changed since the vigilante had known him. He could use that. If you're gonna stay, then come down and fight me yourself. Unless you're scared. Shigaraki laughed, a scratchy sound that hurt Kage's ears. Now Zuzu, why would I be scared of a child? Kage scowled. He needed Shigaraki to stop talking. Otherwise, he might accidentally slip the vigilante's real name. He needed to change the topic. Why are you here exactly, Shiggy? Shigaraki grinned evilly. Isn't it obvious? I'm here to kill All Might. Where is he? Hiding. Kage stood for a moment, taken aback. Then he burst out laughing. It was just so. Shigaraki had come here, expecting All Might, and he wasn't going to get All Might. It was not the kind of karma he had been expecting, but Kage would take it. He felt relieved. If Shigaraki couldn't achieve his intended goal, then Kage had already half won this fight. Sorry to burst your bubble, Shig, but All Might isn't here. Did you bank your whole plan on him showing up to save the day? Well, he won't. You'll just have to settle for me instead. Shigaraki scowled beneath the hand on his face. Fine. But I have a little surprise for you, Zuzu. Something you might remember. No, Mukil. Kage's heart dropped. Through the portal emerged an absolutely massive creature. It was bigger than any of the Nomu the vigilante had ever fought. This might be a problem. The Nomu charged, passing right by Kage and heading for the students before the vigilante could even react. He whipped around to see portals opening up all around the class, dropping them into who knows where. Aizawa was on the creature in seconds, capture scarf shooting out to try to wrap its legs. Kage knew that would be useless, but before he could warn him, Aizawa was backhanded across the USE. Kage stared desperately after the pro as the Nomu turned around to face him. Its grotesque face seemed to be smiling. Kage felt his heart sink. He had never fought such a big one before. Well, there's got to be a first time for everything. Kage waited until the Nomu was almost on top of him before jumping up and over it. He turned in midair, pulling out his grappling hook and shooting it at the creature's neck. It didn't pierce the skin, but it did wrap around the neck, causing the vigilante to shoot forward, landing on the creature's back. He wrapped his legs around the Nomu's neck before pulling his escrima sticks out of there. Sheath, jabbing them into the Nomu's brain. Gritting his teeth, he jammed his thumb into the electricity button. May had upped the voltage of the sticks. This turned out to be very helpful. The Nomu screamed as smoke rose from its now exposed brain. It managed to reach behind it, grabbing Kage around the waist and throwing him into the air. Before he could react, the vigilante felt himself falling. Something seemed to snag his waist, and he was jerked sideways, landing hard on the deck of a ship. Blinking, he looked up at the two students standing over him. Tsuyu and Shinso. Kage groaned, placing a hand against his ribs. It felt as if a few had been broken or maybe even crushed. Wonderful. Are you okay? Tsuyu's voice jolted Kage from his thoughts. He nodded before pushing himself to his feet, ignoring the sharp pain in his side whenever he moved. He frowned, looking out over the side of the boat. He appeared to have landed in the lake sector, and since there were students here, that meant the other class members must have been placed around the rest of the USJ. What should we do? There are a bunch of villains down there in the water. Tsuyu looked scared, and even through his sour expression, Kage could tell that Shinso was worried too. But a plan was already forming in his head, something reckless and dangerous. Something that would probably get them in trouble. He grinned under his mask. This was going to be a wild ride. Okay, you ready? Kage looked over his shoulder at Tsuyu and Shinso, who both nodded, their faces set in serious expressions. It was almost funny how quickly they had turned their moods around. Kage himself had lots of experience in the shutting down emotions department. Go! Kage jumped over the side of the ship, towards the water below. Right before he hit the surface, he dropped the compression bomb he was holding. As villains surged up to meet him, there was a loud bang and a sking sound. The water under his feet suddenly disappeared, and Kage reached up, shooting the grappling hook in his other hand. He felt rather than saw it make contact, swinging him up and out of the way as the whirlpool of water shot up, blasting villains in every direction. Kage landed on a rock on the mountain sector, smiling down at his handiwork. He would have to remember to thank Mei later for the new gear. A few seconds later, Tsu and Shinso landed on the rock next to him, breathing heavily. Good job, you two. They nodded at him, and Shinso managed the smallest of smiles. I gotta say, that was pretty fun. Kage smiled back at him. Indeed it was. Now how about we get back to the others before? A boom caused the mountain beneath them to tremble. Glancing uphill, Kage saw large rocks rolling down towards them. A few students were up the hill above the rocks. Quickly, the vigilante turned to face the two with him. Tsu, can you carry Shinso up to the others like how you got off the boat? Tsu nodded, and Shinso scowled. I don't like being carried by a tongue. Too bad. Now go. Kage ran and jumped off the side of the cliff, leaving the two hero students to reconnect with their classmates. As he sailed towards the center of the USJ, the vigilante shot his grappling hook towards the ceiling, slowing his descent and letting him glance around. What he saw was bad, to say the least. Aizawa appeared to be fighting Shigaraki, but as Kage watched, he could tell that the hero wasn't doing well. Near the body of the fallen Nomu, Bakugo, Todoroki, and Kirishima were fighting three other villains. Twice, Dabi and Toga. Just his luck. Kage landed on top of Toga. It was funny for about 2 seconds before she tried to stab him in the stomach. He jumped back, receiving a slash across his already broken ribs. He gritted his teeth, hissing out a breath. He was not going to admit to pain. Toga got to her feet, smiling at him. You need to be more careful, Zuzu. Knives can be deadly, you know. Kage grimaced at her. Bakugo, who had previously been fighting Toga, didn't seem happy about being ignored. He rushed at her from behind, raising his hands to explode at her. She dodged out of the way, causing Bakugo to barrel past her. Kage caught him before he could fall, holding him back as he tried charging again. When the blonde turned to glare at him, Kage glared right back. That isn't going to work any better a second time. Work with me here. Oh, Zuzu. Toga's words made both of them turn to face her. The knife she had hit Kage with was still clutched in her hand. She was smiling evilly as blood dripped off the blade. You know what happens if I lick this blade, right? Kage stiffened, and Bakugo looked at him questioningly. He felt numb. How could he have been so careless? He let Toga get his blood. She could expose him, and it seemed like she would be happy to. Don't. Try to stop me then. Toga slowly raised the knife to her mouth, tongue out as Kage charged. He had to get that knife. He pulled an eskrima stick from his sheath, hitting Toga in the stomach, but when he pressed the electricity button, only a small fizzle came out of the stick. The vigilante cursed, and Toga laughed, jumping back. That's what you get for trying to hit a girl, Zuzu. Maybe next time, try being born with a quirk. Then you won't have to rely on those sticks. Kage needed to get her to stop talking. He swung out his arm, trying to smack Toga in the side of the head, but she dodged, still laughing. As she jumped back, Kage smacked her wrist with his stick. Toga cried out, and the knife with his blood on it flew a few feet away. "Bakugo! Get the knife!" As the blonde-haired boy ran towards the fallen blade, Toga looked at him, confused. After glancing between Bakugo and Kage a few times, she started laughing hysterically. "Oh Zuzu, this is too good. Out of all the years, out of all the classes, you're helping teach his class? Does he know? Should I tell him?" Kage felt a surge of panic. She knew about Kaken. Bakugo didn't seem to react to the words, but as soon as Toga finished speaking, Kage launched himself at her, knocking her to the ground. Her head smacked into a rock hard, and she fell limply. Kage stood up, breathing hard, and surveyed the damage around him. Most of the villains seemed to be gone, including Twice. Kirishima and Todoroki were fighting Dabi, and they seemed to be succeeding in pushing him back towards the still open portals. But Aizawa. Kage saw the moment where Aizawa blinked and Shigaraki made contact. The skin on Aizawa's arm started to disintegrate, and as the hero fell to the ground with a cry, the vigilante shot forward, swinging his arm towards Shigaraki's head. Shiggy ducked just in time, causing Kage to spin in a circle before facing him again. "Zuzu, that wasn't very nice." "Shut up." Kage swung his Eskrima stick at Shigaraki again, but the villain just caught it in his hand. Kage watched in horror as the stick started to disintegrate, falling to the ground in a pile of ash. He tried to yank his arm back, but Shigaraki had already grabbed his wrist with his free hand. Pain shot up the vigilante's arm as the blue-haired villain smiled. "There's no escape for you this time, Izuku. Like you said, All Might isn't here to save you." A loud boom sounded throughout the uti. A cloud of smoke rose from the doorway, and out of the dust strode, "I am here." Through the pain in his arm, Kage smirked at Shigaraki, who looked angry and confused. "Well, what do you know? It seems that All Might is here to save me." Then he dropped to the ground, his mind going. A week after the USJ incident, Kage was released from UA's hospital wing. He had only needed about 3 days for Recovery Girl to heal his wounds, but the old woman had insisted that he rest for a while. Now he stood in front of Class 1A, reaching out his hand to open the door. He was reminded of the very first time he had ever entered this classroom. He had been so worried about being found out that he had probably looked more nervous than he felt. But now he was more sure of himself. If they hadn't found out yet, the 1A students probably weren't trying to discover his identity. "Is it true you're quirkless? Can we call you Zuzu now? How did you know those villains? How old are you?" Kage took a step back, the onslaught of questions hurting his head. All of the students seemed to be in the classroom, crowded in a big circle around the door, as if they had been waiting for him to come in. The only one not there was Bakugo, who seemed to be ignoring the situation entirely, sitting at his desk with his feet propped up on it. "That's enough. Sit down." The tired but harsh voice came from behind him, and Kage turned to see Aizawa standing there, though it was hard to tell through the bandages covering his head and arms. Kage stepped to the side, letting the teacher walk into the classroom. Aizawa walked to the front of the classroom, sitting at his desk. His eyes, the only part of his face that could be seen, looked tired and annoyed. "Everyone settle down and shut up. We have something very important to discuss today." The class started whispering to each other, but once Aizawa glared in their direction, they quieted down quickly. "We have to start getting ready for the upcoming sports festival." That caused a class-wide uproar. Students jumped up while others started talking loudly. Aizawa sighed loudly, putting his head on his desk. A second later, he started snoring. Kage stared at him in confusion for a second before turning back to face the class. Apparently, he was teaching today. "You better be coming to the sports festival." Kage sighed, pulling off his mask as he climbed through Mei's window. He sat down on her bed and rubbed his tired eyes. He had had to run Class 1A through training all day, and he felt dead on his feet. The only solution, visiting his friend. He hadn't really seen Mei much in the last few weeks, since he had been busy teaching and recovering. He really needed to talk to a friend, and since Mei was the only one he could really talk to, she was his best option. "So? Izuku glanced over at the pink-haired girl, who was fiddling with something at her desk. She sat up, rolling over in her wheelie chair, and propped her feet on Izuku's legs. He frowned at her, and she frowned right back. Izuku sighed. Fine. But I can't exactly go as Izuku, can I? You better. Otherwise it will look weird. She must have noticed the worry on his face because she smiled reassuringly at him. Don't worry, there isn't anyone there who knows you besides Bakugo, and he's going to be busy competing. Plus, you might make some friends besides me, and then you won't have to crawl through my window in the middle of the night to fulfill your need for human interaction. Izuku sighed, knowing he couldn't really argue with her. Which meant he was apparently going to be at the sports festival. He was sure it would be fine. Nothing would go wrong. Because things always go so smoothly for him. How did it go? Suk hadn't been allowed to join in on the USJ attack, which worried him. If the League of Villains no longer trusted him, he wouldn't be able to pass off information to Kage. Or worse, he could be in danger. Dabi sneered at him, which Suk found very annoying. The other League members seemed to think they were better than him, just because their quirks had been useful in the past. Suk smiled to himself. Little did the League know, his quirk was proving to be very useful. As if reading his thoughts, Jack appeared from down the hall. He nodded at Dabi, who just scowled before walking off. What was it with Todorokis and their bad attitudes? Suk turned to face Jack, who looked tired. Well, he was a ghost, so he always looked that way. Thresh just got back with dinner, you wanna eat? Jack asked. Suk nodded, smiling as Jack reached out a hand to help him up. When their skin touched, a weird tingling sensation spread through Suk's arm and up into his head. It was annoying, but it happened whenever he made skin-to-skin contact with either of his skeleton friends. Since both Jack and Thresh were different parts of Suk's brain that had become their own entities, they shared a unique connection. The pair walked down the hall, entering a small kitchen behind the main room of the bar that the League of Villains used as a hideout. A large man with wild brown hair smiled down at Jack and Suk before showing them the food he had bought. As they ate, Jack sensed Suk's concern. Izuku is gonna be okay. And we will too. Yeah. Everything was going to be okay. It was strange to walk into UA without his vigilante gear on. Izuku kept expecting someone to stop him and tell him he wasn't allowed there. But slowly it dawned on him. No one knew him. No one knew he was supposed to be dead. Except for Kaken. That was why Izuku had brought his vigilante mask. Mei had tried to convince him that he would be fine, but the green-haired boy felt it was better to be safe than sorry. So his voice-changing mask was now safely tucked in the pocket of his hoodie. The crowd of people unnerved him. Izuku kept expecting someone to see him and alert the school. But no one spared him a second glance. Well, except for Mei. She came bounding out of the stadium, a huge smile on her face. People hurried to get out of her way as she made a beeline for Izuku, jumping at him and hugging him with a laugh. A startled gasp escaped his mouth as she stepped back, looking even more energetic than usual. Izuku grinned at her. Most of the time, her energy wore him out, but he found himself needing it at that moment. I'm so glad you came. This is gonna be so fun. Izuku nodded as Mei grabbed his arm and dragged him towards the entrance. There were a few heroes mingling around outside, looking like they were supposed to be on patrol but appeared bored. Izuku recognized Empty Lady and Kamui Woods among them. He half wanted to run away and half wanted to get their autographs, but the decision was made for him when Mei pulled him through the entrance into the stadium. Wow! The stadium was huge, and there were already UA students gathered together. Izuku saw Uraraka, Mina, Ida, Kaminari, and a few others out of the corner of his eye. He tried to avoid them as best as possible. He didn't want them to figure him out. Luckily, Izuku didn't see Bakugo anywhere. Maybe he was late? That would be very Kaken of him. Where are you sitting? Izuku's attention was redirected to Mei, who had stopped walking and was bouncing on the ball of her feet, smiling widely. A few other UA students glanced at her worriedly, and Izuku smiled to himself. Mei was a force of nature. They should be concerned. But Chako felt horrible. Here she was on the phone with her parents, having to tell them that she lost. A part of her knew that her loss to Bakugo didn't make her any less likely to become a hero, but it was still hard. She really wished one of her friends was there. Just then, someone knocked on the door. Ochako said goodbye to her parents and went to open it. Expecting someone like Ida or Tsu, she was surprised to be faced with an unfamiliar green-haired boy. He smiled shyly at her. "Uraraka Ochako, right?" he asked. "Yes. Do I know you?" The boy hesitated before shaking his head, smiling sheepishly. "No, but I just wanted to tell you that you did a good job today. Not many people could hold their own against Bakugo like that. I should know." Ochako frowned and waved the green-haired boy into the room. They sat down at the table inside, and the boy pulled out a small notebook from his bag. Do you know Bakugo? You sound like you too have some history." The boy froze before nodding slowly, looking slightly worried. "Yeah, we grew up together. But please don't tell him you saw me here, okay? He wouldn't take it too well." The brunette nodded, understanding. "Was he mean to you growing up?" The green-haired boy laughed humorlessly. "You could say that, yes. Well, I'm sorry to say he hasn't gotten much better. He still seems like a huge JRK to me." This got a real laugh from the freckled boy. "Actually, I would say he's mellowed out quite a bit since we were younger." Ochako wondered what he was going to say, but she didn't push. She found that she liked this boy. He seemed sweet, and he had this aura about him. He seemed like a person who could befriend almost anyone. "Hey, can I get your number?" The boy frowned before nodding, scribbling some numbers onto a corner of his notebook and passing it to her. Then he stood up and headed for the door. But Ochako felt like she had forgotten to ask something. "Wait, what's your name?" The boy seemed to think about that for a few seconds before smiling at her. "You can call me Izuku." "You were great, May." The pink-haired girl looked a bit disappointed, but Izuku wasn't too worried about it. She would bounce back in no time. They were currently in between matches, and the green-haired boy had gone to find May after his talk with Uraraka. It had felt strange, to say the least, to talk to Ochako as himself and not as Kage, but it had been refreshing. "Speaking of talking to students, I'll catch you in a bit, okay? I need to talk to someone." May nodded, smiling as Izuku started walking after the figure he had seen, a boy with red and white hair. "I'll save you a seat." Izuku caught up with Todoroki in an empty hallway. He called out to the boy, tapping him on the shoulder. Todoroki turned to face him, looking slightly confused. "Do I know you?" Izuku swallowed. Had he said that to be polite, or did some part of the fire and ice boy recognize him as Kage? He spoke anyway. No, sorry, I just wanted to ask you something." When Todoroki didn't say anything, Izuku continued. "Why do you only use half of your power?" Todoroki looked taken aback, as if he hadn't been expecting the question. And he probably hadn't. It wasn't every day that a stranger walked up to you and asked you why you were holding back. "Why do you care?" The coldness in Todoroki's voice could have frozen water without the need of his ice quirk, but Izuku kept talking. "I'm sorry if this seems rude, but it's kind of selfish of you. You have this amazing quirk, and you're holding back. You're only using your ice side. I mean, if I had your quirk, I would be using both sides as much as I can, no matter what bad memories are associated with it." Todoroki frowned at Izuku, but the green-haired boy didn't budge. Finally, after a long moment of them staring at each other, Todoroki spoke softly, each of his words sharp enough to cut stone. "You know nothing about me. What gives you the right to try to tell me what to do with my power?" Izuku sighed. He had been expecting this. "I know a lot about you, actually. I know about what happened to your mother, and I know how terrible your father is. I know that you think that somehow only using your mother's quirk is helping you rebel against your father, but all it's doing is holding you back from your full potential. You could be the strongest hero in the world if you would just put your bad blood with your father behind you. It's your power, not his." Todoroki froze, looking like he had been hit with a bag of rocks. Then he turned and strode away with nothing but a curt, "Thank you." Izuku nodded. He had done all he could. Now he would just have to see if his words did any good. "Thanks for saving me a seat. But is it really okay for me to sit in the student section?" May smiled at him. It seemed that she had gotten over her sadness, which was good. She patted the empty seat next to her. "You're fine, don't worry. Now let's watch this match." It's gonna be interesting. Sighing, Izuku sat down and gazed out into the arena. Present Mike was announcing who was going, and Izuku wasn't surprised to hear the names Bakugo and Todoroki. This was going to be an interesting match indeed. As the fight went on, Izuku got more and more frustrated. Had his words not done anything after all? Then he noticed Todoroki's hesitation. Maybe he just needed a bit of a push. Izuku took a deep breath and yelled as loud as he could. "It's your power, not his." The words were ignored by the crowd, but Todoroki heard them. And so did Bakugo. The blonde paused in his attack, scanning the crowd for the person who had spoken. Why did that voice sound so familiar? It couldn't be him. Could it? The words didn't mean anything to Bakugo, but Todoroki seemed to change. In a split second, his face deadpanned, and the arena started to heat up. Bakugo stared at him in shock as his left side began to burn. Flames lighted up the side of his arm, melting the ice that he had shot at Bakugo. Then he charged. It wasn't really a competition after that. The winners were announced, Todoroki in first, Bakugo in second, and Ida and Tokoyami in third. Ida seemed to have left, though Bakugo didn't know why. He felt like he should be mad about second place. At any other point in his life, second place would have resulted in a significant explosion. But Bakugo was too busy thinking about the voice that had yelled at Todoroki. Could it have been him? Could Deku really be here? Whatever the case, the facts were right in front of him. Todoroki had won, and someone who sounded suspiciously like Izuku Midoriya had helped. Patrols with Eraserhead were fun. Normally, Kage would have to do all the heavy lifting on his own, but with Aizawa around, a lot of the fighting was over quite quickly. Though the hobo hero didn't appreciate the glitter bomb method of dropping off criminals at the police station. Well, you can't have everything. The night was surprisingly quiet, which made Kage wary. This part of Mustafu was almost never quiet. There was always someone causing chaos, however small. But it was as if all of the criminals in this part of the city had planned to take the night off. It was unsettling to say the least. As if the universe was reading his thoughts, a distant boom rang out, followed by smoke rising in the distance. Before he could stop to think, Kage was sprinting towards the disturbance, leaping over alleys and skidding across slanted rooftops. Aizawa was right behind him, keeping pace surprisingly well for not being used to the area. The pair reached the edge of a roof and stared down in horror at what had caused the smoke and noise. A Nomu. But it wasn't like any Nomu Kage had ever seen. It was bigger and it just looked different. Something about it seemed so much worse than any of the others the Vigilante had ever come across, including the one at the USJ. All of a sudden, another boom sounded, and another cloud of smoke rose from a completely different part of the city. Then another. And another. How many are there? Kage heard the fear in his own voice, and he tried to steel his nerves. He couldn't be getting cold feet now. Not when so many lives were on the line. Next to him, Aizawa cursed under his breath. Then Kage remembered something from class a few days ago. 1A students are doing their internships right now, right? You don't think? Aizawa pointed down below them, where two figures were shooting fire at the Nomu. One of the figures was shorter than the other, and his dual-colored hair whipped back and forth across his face. Todoroki. Sheet. Aizawa got his capture scarf ready, turning to face Kage. I'm going to see what I can do here. I want you to go around to the other Nomu locations. Help who you can, but don't get too hurt. And please don't die on me. Normally, Kage wouldn't have taken orders from anyone, but he just nodded, smiling a little. Oh, don't worry about me. I don't plan on dying anytime soon. With that, he turned and took off across the rooftops towards the closest column of smoke. But something in an alleyway below him caught his eye, and he froze, trying to process what was below him. A person dressed in a hero costume was leaning against the side of the alley, bleeding badly. Another person in strange armor was frozen in the middle of the alley, his face an expression of fear and hate. Oh God. It was Ida. And in front of him. This society puts too much hope in false heroes. But I will put an end to that pointless hope. A large, humanoid figure was standing in front of Ida, smiling menacingly. He had a mask covering his eyes, and there was a sword strapped across his back. In his hand, a small blade gleamed, dripping blood onto the ground. Kage made a split-second decision. Pro heroes would be handling the Nomu. Right now, this was more important. Kage jumped down off the roof, landing in a roll and coming up in a crouch. He pulled one of his Eskrima sticks from his back sheath as he slowly stood up, staring at the villain in the eyes. The figure glared down at him, obviously a little annoyed that he had been interrupted. You know, you should really not monologue. It's a waste of air. The villain scowled, gripping the knife in his hand harder. My business is not with you, Kage. I am here to purge these false heroes. But if you get in my way, I will not hesitate to take you out as well. Kage laughed, though his nerves were fraying. You can try, but I promised someone that I wouldn't die tonight, and I would hate to go back on my word. Stain was clearly annoyed. He charged at Kage, swinging his knife down at the vigilante's head. Kage ducked, jabbing his Eskrima stick into Stain's side and pushing the button. Electricity arced across the villain's body, and he jerked forward with a grunt. But to Kage's dismay, he was still very much conscious, and very much angry. Stain pulled the sword from his back, advancing on Kage. The vigilante tried to jump out of the way of the oncoming blade, but right after the sword missed, Kage felt a sharp pain in his thigh. He stumbled back, glancing down to see the small knife that Stain had been holding in his other hand sticking out of his leg. Stain advanced on him, his eyes gleaming with hate, but he yelled in surprise when flames engulfed him. Incredulous, Kage turned to face the entrance of the alley. A boy stood there with his left hand extended, his eyes narrowed in concentration. Todoroki had followed him. Sorry it took me a while, it's hard to keep up with you from the ground. Aizawa sent me. He figured you would get yourself in trouble. He pulled a phone out from his pocket and pressed something before sliding it back in, turning his attention back to Stain. The villain was lying on the ground, smoking and groaning, but as Kage watched, he stumbled to his feet, sword still in hand. I would not suggest you try anything, Stain. There are pros on their way, and they won't be too happy to find 3 injured people. Stain tried to rush forward, but something shot out from behind Todoroki, wrapping around Stain's feet and making him fall. Aizawa stepped into the mouth of the alley, glaring at Kage. I thought I told you to be careful. Kage tried his best to look indignant with a knife sticking out of his leg. I tried my best, all right? Aizawa sighed, looking very much like a tired dad. Kage's vision started swimming, but he saw other pro heroes arrive, hauling off a now thoroughly angry Stain. He watched Aizawa walk up to Ida, helping him stand. Then Kage's legs gave out. He slid to the ground, his back pressed against the wall of the alley. Really, why did blood loss have to be a thing? It was a pain. Someone was calling his name, but Kage was too far away to care. He tried to pry his eyes open. He needed to get up. He couldn't worry Aizawa. Kage's mind slipped into blackness, accompanied only by the screams of his mother and the sound of flames roaring. Summer break for Yue had started 2 days ago. For Izuku, that meant he could work more hours during the day at the cafe. Since break had started, Izuku had been sleeping in his old apartment above his place of work, which meant he didn't have to worry about a 1A student walking in on him without his mask on. Ding. The bell above the door of the cafe tinkled, and Izuku glanced up, freezing when he saw who was coming in. It was Uraraka, Tsu, Ida, Shinso, Mina, Kaminari, Todoroki, and Kirishima. They were talking and laughing loudly, and when Ochako glanced up, her face lit up in a surprised smile. Izuku! Her call made the others turn to face him, confused. Izuku saw Todoroki's face morph into an expression of recognition, but the green-haired boy prayed that he wouldn't say anything in front of his classmates. Izuku composed himself, smiling warmly at the group. Hey Yura! Fancy seeing you here. The brunette smiled at him, walking up to the counter. Is this where you work? Izuku shrugged, glancing down at his name tag, which read Zuku. Yeah. Behind Ochako, someone cleared their throat. Would you care to introduce us, Yura? The brunette looked embarrassed, turning back to her friends and nodding towards Izuku. This is my friend Izuku. I met him at the sports festival. The green-haired boy smiled as the others introduced themselves. He already knew their names, but they obviously didn't know that. After they ordered their drinks and food, Uraraka turned back to Izuku, smiling. Hey, we were just on our way to the mall to get some things for our class trip this summer. You should come. Izuku tried to protest, but the others chimed in, insisting until he eventually gave in. But only after Ochako convinced him that a certain angry blonde wouldn't be there. It'll be fun, don't worry. Besides, this way you can meet the rest of our class. Izuku resisted the urge to say that he already knew all of their classmates and had actually beaten them all in the past, but he decided against it. Dropping the fact that he was a well-known vigilante didn't seem like the type of thing to make people want to be friends with him. 30 minutes later, Izuku found himself standing in front of the rest of Class 1A, minus Bakugo, smiling and waving shyly at them. After introductions, everyone split up into small groups to do some shopping. Izuku ended up with Yura and Tsu, which felt a little uncomfortable since they were holding hands and gazing at each other the whole time. Eventually, he managed to slip away, walking slowly in the direction of the exit. It was strange to be out in a crowded public setting. Izuku normally tried to avoid places like this, as they tended to attract attention from heroes and villains alike, and he didn't like being around when those fights broke out. He often felt useless, unable to help without revealing himself. Additionally, he found civilians fawning over All Might annoying. Suddenly, he felt someone throw their arm over his shoulder. A voice spoke close to his ear, low and raspy and all too familiar. It sent an involuntary shiver down his spine. He didn't dare glance up at the scarred face of Shigaraki as he felt a cold hand clamp around his throat. I think it's time we had a little talk. What do you say, Zuzu? What do you want? The two of them were sitting on a bench underneath a small tree, off to the side of the mall. Izuku resisted the urge to glance around, wanting to find a 1A student, a pro hero, anyone who could help him. He knew that if Shigaraki wanted to, he could harm him in an instant. So why wasn't he? I'll get right to the point, Zuzu. I don't like you very much. Despite everything, Izuku snorted. Shiggy, I'm hurt. Did you come all this way to tell me something I already knew? The green-haired boy could feel Shigaraki's anger growing, but he couldn't contain a small laugh from escaping his throat. The hand around his neck squeezed harder, causing Izuku to gasp slightly for air. The only reason you are still alive right now is because you can still be useful to the MSTR. Otherwise, you would be a pile of ashes, along with all of those friends of yours. Izuku gulped. He couldn't let Shigaraki hurt the students. He wouldn't be able to live with himself if that happened. So let me get this straight, Shiggy. You risk coming out in public just to tell me that you totally could kill me if you were allowed to? Seems kinda stupid to me. Before Shigaraki could respond, a voice behind them spoke up. Izuku? Who's that? Shigaraki gave one last squeeze on the boy's neck before standing up and walking away. Izuku rubbed his throat, turning to see a concerned Yura and a confused Tsu. Curiosity welled up inside him, causing the green-haired boy to turn back to the villain, calling out to him. Shigaraki, what is all for one planning? The blue-haired man paused, turning a dark smirk on Izuku. You'll know soon enough. Until next time, Zuzu. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Izuku to stare in dismay after him. Izuku, why didn't you apply for UA? At the question, the green-haired boy froze, gripping the coffee cup in his hand a little harder. Since the mall incident, he had been hanging out with the group from UA a lot more often, sometimes at Yui's cafe and sometimes elsewhere. Today they were at the former, huddled around a small table. The cafe had been nearly empty all day, so Izuku hadn't felt too bad about taking a break from work to talk with his friends. It felt so strange, but he really did consider this group of kids his friends. Sure, he had known them for months as Kage, but that was different. Now, he didn't have to feel awkward about wanting to talk with them. But the question wasn't one he had been prepared for. He glanced over at Kirishima, the one who had asked the question, and tried to think of something that didn't involve revealing his identity. Finally, he settled on something that seemed safe enough. I would have wanted to try for the hero course, but I couldn't have gotten in. Why? Uraraka was watching him curiously, a latte in her hands. The rest of the group, Mina, Tsu, Ida, Todoroki, Kirishima, and Kaminari, were also looking at him with curious expressions. Their collective gazes made him fidget. There was no avoiding it now. Well, I'm quirkless. They all stared at him in shock, except for Todoroki, whose expression stayed neutral. There was a moment of awkward silence, and Izuku wanted to run. Or curl up in a ball and hide. Either worked. Finally, Kaminari spoke. I don't know what that must be like for you, but if you think we're gonna stop being friends with you just because you don't have a quirk, then you're even stupider than me. The others nodded enthusiastically, and Izuku felt a genuine smile rise to his lips. Was this what being with friends was supposed to feel like? Izuku had never experienced this before. Yes, he had Mei, but there was something different about being in a group of supportive people. It made him feel somehow lighter, as if Ochako had used her quirk on him. The conversation turned towards the upcoming trip, with all the students speculating about what it could entail. Izuku didn't say much. He just sipped his coffee and enjoyed the peacefulness of feeling normal. But nothing good can ever last, and soon enough, the others had to go home, leaving Izuku to clean up the empty cafe. At 5 p.m. sharp, the green-haired boy closed the cafe and headed upstairs to his apartment. Shigaraki's words from the other day had been nagging at him, and he needed to do something about it. Slipping on a hoodie and a mask, he headed out, intending to drop in on some old friends. All three of them were at the bar that night. Suk was slumped over the counter, his head resting on his folded arms as Thresh downed a beer next to him. Jack was behind the counter, elbows on the wood, propping up his head. When Izuku walked in, Jack nodded at him, while Thresh raised a hand, calling out, "Well, if it isn't our little friend. Come to have a drink with us? You never know when it might be your last chance." Izuku slid into the bar stool on the other side of Suk, who still hadn't looked up. No matter how ominous that may sound, I think I'm going to pass on the offer. I still have patrol later, and I don't really want to fall off any buildings. Thresh laughed, setting down his now empty beer mug on the counter with a loud thunk. Izuku turned to Jack, nodding his head towards the unhappy Suk. What's wrong with him? Jack hesitated, glancing down at his friend. To be honest, I don't really know. He's been like this all day. I think he's just worried about what's happening at the hideout. Izuku tilted his head, curious. What's happening? And please don't give me another riddle. Just because these two, he jerked a thumb at Suk and Thresh, can read your mind, that doesn't mean I can. The last riddle almost got me in trouble, it was so vague. Jack frowned but nodded, handing Izuku a cup of coffee. He took it gratefully. He would need the caffeine if he was going to stay awake through the night for patrol. To tell the truth, we have no idea what's been going on. No one will tell us anything anymore. They really don't trust us. It's just a matter of time until they try to take action against us. From under his arms, Suk groaned. Thresh just nodded along, though Izuku knew he probably wasn't taking in any of their conversation. The three in front of him were very different from their other counterparts, but that was to be expected when you split your mind into three people. Suk's quirk was an interesting one. He could create and animate skeletons, giving them pieces of his consciousness when he did so. A while ago, he had decided to create two semi-permanent skeletons with whom he could share his mind. This meant that they could read each other's thoughts and talk in their heads, but it also meant that most of Suk's more challenging traits had been concentrated into one person. Thresh may have meant well, but it was a challenge to get him to do anything helpful or productive. Well, that's a shame. Was hoping to get some information out of you, but I guess that doesn't work if you don't have anything to offer. I guess I'll be going then. Lots of people to save and all. Jack's frown pulled his normally handsome face down. All we know is that they're planning something big. I would be on the lookout for the time being. Sorry we can't be of more help to you. Izuku nodded, standing from his chair and heading for the door. If he could no longer count on the three for information, then he had a problem. But all he could do now was watch and wait. His new friends' lives might depend on him staying alert. So Izuku would be needing a lot more coffee. Hurry up, or I'm leaving you all behind. Kage sighed, scanning the crowd of UA kids. Class 1B wasn't riding with 1A on the bus, but all that really meant to the vigilante was fewer distractions. Kage's gaze fell on the small group of his friends, and he smiled a little under his mask. It was strange not being able to talk to them after being around them for a few weeks, but he wasn't about to blow his cover. Aizawa appeared next to Kage, scowling at the loud group of kids. The vigilante glanced up at him before snorting a little, causing the teacher's glare to turn on him instead. If you're gonna be like this for the whole trip, then I'm going to leave you here. Kage snorted. Please. You could never leave me behind. Besides, you need my help with this group of idiots. Aizawa sighed, leaning against the side of the bus as students started piling in. Just because you're right doesn't mean I have to like it. Kage let out a genuine laugh, causing Aizawa to glance at him curiously. Kage waved him off before turning to follow the class onto the bus. Time passed, and soon they arrived at their destination. Where do you think we're going? Voices drifted up to Kage from the back of the bus. The rocking of the vehicle and the warmth of the summer sun threatened to make him fall asleep, but he couldn't risk slipping into dreams, not here where anyone would hear him scream. Suddenly, the bus jolted to a stop. Climbing out, Kage saw they had stopped on the side of a cliff overlooking a forest. Aizawa got out last and called for the class's attention. That was when Kage noticed the other heroes. Everyone shut up. The Pussycats will be helping us with this training camp, so listen to them as if they were me. I will know if you don't. Kaminari raised his hand, and Aizawa sighed, nodding for him to speak. Aizawa-sensei, where are we exactly? Aren't we supposed to be at a training camp? Aizawa opened his mouth to answer, but one of the Pussycats stepped forward, smiling mischievously. Ah, that's where we come in. The camp is just over there through the forest. But we decided it would be more fun if we made this into an exercise. A few students groaned while others looked excited. Kage stayed neutral, though he wished he could participate in this exercise. He had heard Aizawa talking about it on the phone, and it seemed like fun. Ready? Go! Kage realized he had been zoning out just as the Pussycat Pixie Bob activated her quirk. A wave of earth swept the students down the cliff, their yells echoing around the forest. Kage let out a small snort as Mandalay walked over to him, smiling. I take it you're Aizawa's asset? Kage raised an eyebrow at Aizawa, smirking underneath his mask. Asset? You flatter me, Eraser. Aizawa groaned, glaring half-heartedly at Kage. It wasn't my idea, trust me. Later, during dinner, Kage noticed Mandalay looking around, as if searching for something. What did you lose? He asked, walking over to her. She glanced up and let out a sigh. My nephew, Koda. You may have noticed him earlier? I don't think he got any dinner. Kage reached out, taking the plate of food from the hero. I'll find him, don't worry. Mandalay smiled tiredly at him, thanking him before hurrying off to meet with the other pussycats. Kage headed towards the woods, the plate of food steaming in his hands. He thought he had seen a small boy sneak off, but now he was sure. Kage wandered around for a while before finally finding the cave where Koda was sitting outside. It had taken him so long to find the boy that the food had gone cold. Kage sighed, setting the plate down before turning to leave. He could tell that Koda didn't want any company right now. It was best to leave him be. Who are you? I don't recognize you as a hero. The small, sullen voice made the vigilante turn, facing the black-haired boy. Koda was trying to hide it, but Kage could tell he was curious. The vigilante slowly walked over, crouching down next to the kid. Well, you probably don't know me because I'm not a hero. I'm a vigilante. You can call me Kage if you want. He smiled down at Koda through his mask as the other boy's eyes widened. I've heard about you. You save people because it's the right thing to do, right? Not because you want money or fame. Kage nodded, surprised but happy that Koda knew so much about him. It had never crossed his mind that he had fans, but now that he thought about it, it seemed likely that there were people out there rooting for him. It felt strange but comforting. Why are you just a vigilante? Is it only because you don't want any fame? Kage hesitated but decided to answer honestly. No. Ever since I was little, my life's dream was to be a hero. But I couldn't. You see, I'm quirkless. Koda thought for a minute before frowning. So? I don't see why you can't keep trying. You could be the first quirkless hero. When Kea didn't answer, Koda looked at him with a little worry in his eyes. Did you give up on your dream? Kage smiled warmly at him before standing to leave. He remembered what Tsukachi had said to him. No, I don't think I have yet. Anyone want to guess what fun things we're doing today? Pixie Bob's voice was overly cheerful, which usually meant that whatever they were doing was either going to be dangerous or scary. After spending a few days with the Pussycats, helping them monitor the students, Kage had come to realize that Pixie Bob only got excited about things involving danger. Today, her cheerful tone suggested it was going to be very dangerous. When no one answered her, Pixie Bob continued, "Well, since today is the last day of your training with us, we've devised a fun little game for tonight. I'll give you more details after today's training, but I hope you all will get pumped for the friendly competition that's coming." With that, the students went about their daily routine, which consisted of training, eating lunch, more training, and dinner. All their food had been prepared by them, which meant it wasn't nearly as good as Mandalay's cooking, but the students seemed too tired to care. Kage noticed that Koda hadn't been present at any of the meals. When he asked Mandalay about Koda's parents, she had shared the sad truth. Well, they were heroes. A few years ago, they were killed by a particularly nasty villain. Ever since then, Koda has hated heroes. He doesn't even like being around us that much, and we're the only family he has left. Kage felt worried about the kid. He had a faint idea of who Koda's parents were, but he didn't want to push the boy. What had happened to the water hose heroes had been quite traumatic, and Kage didn't want to make Koda relive that. But he still wanted to ensure the boy ate. So, he found himself carrying a plate of food to Koda's secret hideout, while the other students were eating lunch. He set the plate down beside the boy who hadn't even looked at him. "You need to eat something." Koda said nothing. Kage sighed, turning away and walking back towards the camp. Time for a boring afternoon of overseeing training. And then, Pixie Bob's dangerous little game. Later that night, Pixie Bob grinned widely at the expressions of the students. "Your classes are going to take turns scaring each other. Doesn't that sound fun? First, 1B will be hiding along the path we've shown, and 1A will be walking through it. If you can make it to the other side without getting scared, you win." A few students groaned, while others looked nervous. Kage felt his earlier worry fade a bit. This wouldn't be too dangerous. No one was going to get hurt. "Ready? Go find your hiding spots, 1B. As half of the kids peeled away from the group to walk into the woods, everyone from 1A paired up. Kage saw Tsu with Yura, and the interesting pair of Todoroki with Bakugo. He was curious to see how those two would handle the challenge. As the first pair started walking through, Kage caught a whiff of something in the air that smelled suspiciously like smoke. He glanced out over the trees, noticing dark clouds billowing up from the forest. Turning to the Pussycats, who seemed to have noticed it too, he heard Pixie Bob say, "Kage, you go make sure all the kids made it through. We'll protect those on the other side." The vigilante nodded and took off through the trees. As he ventured deeper into the forest, he noticed a hazy gas floating near the ground. That's when he saw the bodies. A mix of 1A and 1B students were lying in the dirt, some choking on the gas while others were completely still. Kage looked at them in horror. He wouldn't be able to carry all of them. What was he supposed to do? Then two figures burst through the trees, Shoji and Sato, both wearing gas masks. When they saw Kage, they hurried over, assessing the situation. "How many can you carry?" Shoji asked, slinging two of the four figures over his back while Sato picked up the other two. They turned and ran back toward the other students, with Kage following behind, scanning the area for any more kids. He found none, which meant that most of the students must have made it through or gotten gas masks. When he reached the clearing where the other students were, Kage froze. In front of him stood two villains. One looked more like a lizard than a human, holding a large sword made up entirely of smaller swords. The other was huge, holding a long piece of cement over Pixie Bob's head. The rest of the Pussycats were standing in front of the students, trying to protect them while also attempting to get their friend back. Kage glanced around, trying to see if everyone was present. But there was one person that stood out to him. Someone was missing. Mandalay. "I know where Koda is. I'm going to get him and make sure he's safe." The cat hero nodded at him before turning her attention back to the two villains in front of her. Kage ran. He ran faster than he ever had before. Something in his gut told him he had to get there. That something was wrong. And it seemed his gut was right. Rounding the corner to the cave, Kage stared at the back of an enormous man. Lying on the ground in front of him, with an expression of absolute terror on his face, was Kota. When the villain attacked, Kage did the same. As the big man threw a fist at Kota, Kage jumped around him, snatching the kid in his arms and leaping out of the man's reach. The villain looked momentarily confused as to why there wasn't a child under his hand. Then he saw Kage. His sneer turned into a scowl as he stepped forward. "You weren't on the student list. I'm guessing you're that other one that Shigaraki was talking about." Kage was shaking, but he tried to inject as much sarcasm into his voice as possible, praying it wouldn't betray him. "So that's what Shiggy is calling me now, huh? The other one? Kinda lame nickname if you ask me." The large man shrugged, obviously not one for conversations. "I don't really care who you are. But you're in my way. I was just about to have some fun with this one. After all, what's the point in hurting someone's parents if you don't get to rub it in their face afterwards?" Kage felt Kota stiffen in his arms. The vigilante glanced down at him, and a look of recognition settled on the kid's features. Recognition and horror. "It was you." Kota's voice came out quiet, and it made the big man laugh. He reached up and ripped off the mask he had been wearing, revealing a scarred face and a metal eye. He spread his arms out, grinning wildly. "In the flesh. It's so nice to get recognized by my fans." Kage was slowly inching backwards, trying to get to the edge of the cliff without the big man noticing. Maybe he could reach it and jump. He could probably keep Kota from being hurt from the fall, but that meant he would have to take damage himself. That wouldn't be good if they were making a run for it. Before he could come to a decision, the villain made one for him. He leapt forward, bringing his arm around for another strike. Kage jumped to the side, managing to throw Kota out of the way. He felt something large connect with his side, and he heard a loud crunch. Then he was flying through the air, skidding to a stop on rock. Groaning, the vigilante lifted his head to see the large villain walking slowly towards him. He was obviously enjoying this, but that would be his downfall. Kage would make sure of that. As the man lowered his hand to strike again, Kage rolled to one side, coming up on one knee as he reached behind him. One of his hands wrapped around the handle of an eskrima stick, and he whipped it out, bringing it up as a brace for the next strike. Kage clenched his teeth as the weight of the attack pressed him backwards, farther away from the edge and Kota. When the villain pulled back for another strike, Kage leapt forward, jabbing the eskrima stick into the man's gut. Then he pressed the button. The man wasn't nearly as hard to shock as the Nomu at the USJ had been. He fell back with a cry, but not before getting in one last hit. His fist sailed under Kage's defenses, landing on the side of his face and sending him flying into the cliff's wall. He hit the wall with a loud crack, and he could almost feel his ribs snap. But the villain was lying unconscious in front of him. He had succeeded. He slid to the ground, blood slowly trickling down from his hairline, his vision going fuzzy at the edges. He knew he couldn't black out yet. There were other people who needed saving. He had to stay awake. Just as the black threatened to engulf him, he heard a voice in his head. At first, Kage thought it was his conscience, showing up in his last moments to scold him for being reckless. But that couldn't be it. It was a woman's voice, and he was pretty sure his inner monologue wasn't feminine. "We have found out that the target of this attack is Bakugo Katsuki. Bakugo, wherever you are, come straight to us so the heroes can protect you." The words snapped him out of his spiral. Kage's eyes flew open, and he tried to sit up, but cried out as his cracked ribs rubbed against one another. Then there was a small figure in front of him, looking down at him with worry and concern. "Can I help?" Kage leaned back, nodding. "Kota, if you reach into the pocket of my breathes, you'll find a small bottle. Could you hand it to me, please? I don't think I can move my arm." Kota nodded, shaking slightly as he reached forward. He managed to find the bottle and handed it to Kage. Grimacing, the vigilante reached up with his good arm, slowly pulling his cracked mask off his face. He would have to ask May to fix it later. Kota's eyes widened as Kage's mask and goggles fell away, revealing the face of a teenager. He had probably been expecting an adult, but the boy in front of him, now chugging the mystery liquid, was likely no older than the kids in 1A. As the liquid rolled down Kage's throat, it warmed him from the inside out. It was a special concoction he had picked up from Recovery Girl that helped in quick healing. The old woman had insisted he take some with him since he was always getting himself into trouble. Shakily, Kage stood up, a hand outstretched to the cliff wall for balance. He inhaled slightly, assessing how far along he was in the healing process. He nodded, turning back to Koda. "Hoppunkit, we have a Bakugo to find." Kage groaned as he rolled over, making sure Koda had landed all right. The kid was already on his feet, staring down worriedly at the vigilante, who was still lying on the ground. With a grunt, Kage pushed himself to his feet, wobbling a little. He placed a hand to his side, trying to feel how his rib damage was coming. Not good. Suddenly, a sound jolted Kage out of his thoughts. He turned just in time to catch the capture scarf flying towards him. He winced, releasing his grip. That had been his bat arm. Figures appeared from the trees, about 6 in total. Most looked like kids, but one was tall, with his hair floating up around his head and his eyes blazing. Izawa. When the hero recognized him, he dropped his guard a little, letting his hair lie flat again. He walked forward, trying to get a good look at the kid. "Problem child, what happened? Where did you go?" Kage tried to steady his breathing, making sure he didn't let any pain seep into his voice. "I had a kid to save." He nudged Koda forward, who had been hiding behind the vigilante during the exchange. The kid looked uncertain about the teacher, but after a nod from Kage, he stepped closer. "I can take him back to Mandalay. You should try to get back to camp, you look terrible." "No." Kage hadn't meant to snap, and it seemed to confuse Izawa. The vigilante took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "No. I need to find Bakugo." Izawa looked confused for a moment, but then understanding crossed his face. Of course, he knew that Kage had known his student. "Fine. But be careful. How hurt are you?" Not badly?" "Problem child." "Fine. 4 cracked ribs, a sprained wrist, maybe a broken arm. So normal." Izawa looked like he wanted to argue, but he didn't. "Can you at least escort these kids to camp while you're looking for your friend?" Kage nodded, turning to the 5 students as Izawa picked Koda up. The vigilante recognized Uraraka, Tsu, Kirishima, Mina, and Kaminari. Great, all of his friends. Luckily, he had pulled his hood low over his eyes, praying that the darkness of the night would help disguise his features. It seemed to be working, as none of the students looked like they recognized him. "Okay, let's go. Stay close." As he turned, Kage winced at the sound of his own voice. It sounded like he had been gargling with gravel. At least it didn't sound like his normal voice. The students followed closely behind him as they made their way quickly through the forest, searching for any sign of an explosion ripped through the night. Then, a cold breeze blew through Kage's hair, making him instinctively grip the edge of his hood. So that way then. Kage took off running, hearing the breaths of the students behind him as they tried to keep up. The group rounded a corner, only to come face to face with Todoroki and a villain. The ground was covered in ice, and Kage tread carefully as he walked up to stand next to the boy. "What happened?" The sharp words seemed to snap Todoroki out of whatever stupor he had been in. He turned slightly to see Kage standing beside him. Then he nodded towards the villain. He had Bakugo and Tokoyami. Before Kage could question the statement, the villain held up 2 marbles. He had a mask covering his face, but the vigilante just knew he was smiling. "Do you like it? It's a little magic trick of mine. I used to be a performer, you know. Old habits die hard, I guess." Suddenly, the villain threw something in front of him, causing a black cloud of smoke to shoot towards the pair. They tried to wave it away, running forward to intercept the villain, but when they reached where the villain had been, there was nothing. "What are we supposed to do now?" Todoroki was scanning the treeline, and he suddenly pointed towards one of the taller trees. Kage saw the figure of a man running through the treetops, a familiar top hat on his head. Kage turned to the other students behind him, waving for them to follow. "Come on. We've got to catch him." They managed to intercept Mr. Compress in a clearing a little ways away from the scene of their previous encounter. But he wasn't alone. Toga and Dabi were standing there too, and they didn't look happy to see the students. When Toga's eyes landed on Kage, she smiled wildly, holding up a knife. "Hey Zuzu, have you come to play too?" Out of the corner of his eye, Kage saw Ochako and Tsu's eyes widen slightly, as if in recognition. "Toga!" Kage's voice was harsher than usual, causing the blonde to smile wider. "Oh, is Zuzu mad that we stole his little friend? Don't worry, you can see him if you want." Suddenly, the marble in Mr. Compress's hand let out a popping sound, and Bakugo appeared, coughing on marble dust. Before anyone could move, Dabi reached out and clamped a hand around the back of the angry blonde's neck. "A warning. Try anything and he suffers." Kage swallowed, taking a small step forward. "Dabi. Go." The scarred man just smirked, the hand at Bakugo's throat squeezing harder. "Or what, Zuzu? Last I checked, a quirkless failure like you can't do anything to me." Kage's chest grew hot. He hated that word. Quirkless. It was as good an insult as useless nowadays, but somehow worse. Because even if you were useless, you could improve. But quirkless people couldn't. They would always be stuck without power, forced to be weak for the rest of their lives. With that realization, Kage reached behind him and pulled one of his eskrima sticks out of its sheath. His hands were trembling, but it was from anger, not fear. "Don't." Before Todoroki could finish his sentence, Kage leapt forward, jabbing his eskrima stick at Dabi's head. But his stick bounced off a blade. He stepped back, Toga now standing in his way. Her smile was made worse by her sharp teeth. "Don't think it will be that easy, Zuzu." That was when the other students attacked. The clearing erupted into chaos, students fighting villains, Kage desperately trying to get to Bakugo. Then the worst thing he could think of happened. A purple portal opened behind Dabi, and the scarred man was backing into it, dragging a fighting Bakugo with him. Kage didn't think. He just ran, tearing through the chaos, reaching out. He felt his hood blow off his head, but he didn't care. He just had to reach Bakugo. The portal was closing. Kage cried out, reaching as far forward as he could. "Kaken!" The blonde's eyes widened, recognition causing his face to go slack. Right before the portal closed, he reached out his hand, and their fingers brushed. Deku! Then he was gone. Kage fell to his knees, staring blankly at the ground. His face felt wet. Absently, he wondered if his head injury was still bleeding. Reaching up, he wiped the wetness off his cheek, staring in confusion at the watery pink liquid now dripping off his hand. Was he crying? A rustle to his left caused him to glance up. Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the other students staring at him in confusion. They must recognize him now. But he couldn't bring himself to care. Aizawa rushed forward, crouching down next to Izuku. He tentatively reached out, placing a hand on the green-haired boy's shoulder. "What happened?" Somehow, Kage managed to speak past the dryness in his throat. "He's gone. Aizawa, Bakugo's gone." They were followed by the other members of 1A, all whispering to each other. Izuku couldn't meet their eyes. He felt like they probably hated him now. He had lied to them for months. How could they ever think of him as a friend if he had never told them the truth about who he was? Arms wrapped around him, and Izuku froze. Looking down, he saw Ochako with her forehead resting on his shoulder. She was shaking with silent tears. Izuku held her at arm's length, confused. There were tear tracks down her face. "We were so worried. They wouldn't let us see you until now. We thought..." She stopped, but the unspoken words hovered in the air between them. This emptiness weighed him down, filled with guilt. "Aren't you mad at me?" Izuku's voice came out in a hoarse whisper. "Apparently, not speaking for 2 days straight could be bad for you. Who could have guessed?" Ochako pulled back, looking confused. "Why would we be mad at you?" The green-haired boy stared down at his hands, one still wrapped in bandages. He absently picked at the wrapping. "Because I lied to you. How can you possibly not be mad at me for that?" When he glanced up again, Izuku was shocked by his friend's expressions. They all just looked not angry, just sad. "Izuku," Kirishima's voice was gentle, and it hurt Izuku's heart. "We could never be mad at you. You had good reason to keep this from us. We're all just glad you're alive." The others nodded emphatically. The room fell into a comfortable silence, everyone stuck in their own thoughts. Suddenly, Kaminari snapped his fingers. Wait a minute. You're Izuku. Everyone looked at him with expressions that ranged from confused to exasperated. Yes, Kami, we've been over this, Shinso said, placing a hand on the blonde's shoulder. Kaminari shook him off, frowning. No, that's not what I meant. I mean, you're the Izuku that Bakugo told us about. His quirkless friend who left. Kirishima looked like he had been hit with a truck. He smacked his forehead, letting out a groan. Of course. That makes so much sense. We're so stupid. Izuku, Ochako spoke slowly as if she was talking to a frightened animal. You remember what happened, right? The green-haired boy felt his stomach drop. Yes. I couldn't save him. He's gone. Oh. Kirishima looked let down. We were hoping you might have an idea as to how to find Bakubro. Suddenly, a thought popped into Izuku's head. He did have an idea. A very bad, very dangerous idea. Which meant it just might work. Actually, Izuku said, smiling for the first time in days. I might know some friends who can help. Hold on, you're serious about this? Izuku sighed, leaning back in his chair to frown at Jack. After much arguing, the freckled boy had managed to convince Aizawa to let Jack, Suk, and Thresh onto the UA campus. Now they were sitting in the support course classroom, Kirishima, Ida, and Todoroki standing awkwardly to the side. Mei was sitting next to Izuku, fiddling with a new prototype mask. She had yelled at him for about an hour when he had told her about his busted mask, but she had finally promised to fix it if she was allowed to sit in on this meeting. Suk, please explain to Jack that I'm always serious. Suk just groaned, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. Izuku, we can help you with this, but are you sure you want to do it? It could be dangerous. No, it will be dangerous. Jack's voice sounded very annoyed. Why is it that whenever you want our help, it's always dangerous? Jack, I wouldn't be asking for your help if I could do this by myself. Izuku heard the worry in his own voice. He hated it. But I can't. Not this time. Jack sighed, dropping his head onto the table in front of him. Izuku knew he would never admit outright that he was in on the plan, so the green-haired boy figured this was the best admission he would be getting. He clapped his hands together, turning to his friends. Okay then. Do you guys think you can carry through on your end? If this goes according to plan, you won't have to do anything. But almost nothing I do goes according to plan, so that's why you guys are here. Ida, Todoroki, and Kirishima all nodded, showing varying levels of resolve. Izuku turned to Mei, who seemed to be finished with the mask and had moved on to an eskrima stick. I know this is a lot to ask, but do you think you can finish that by tonight? I might need it. Mei shot him a grin, and Izuku felt a little bit better. Aizu, do you really think so little of my skills? Izuku smiled at her as he stood up to leave. When he reached the door, he turned to face the ragtag group of rescuers. All right, team. Meet at the front gates at 11. Be prepared for anything. We are going to succeed. Because there was no other option but to succeed. The group took the subway into battle. Jack had sent Izuku the location, so now they were on their way to Kamino, riding an empty subway train in complete silence, everyone lost in their own thoughts. Mei had shown up right on time with all of his prepped gear, but he still felt antsy. If this failed, if something happened to one of the students, he would never be able to forgive himself. So he wouldn't let anything happen. He felt his resolve harden as that thought took precedence in his mind. He would do whatever was necessary to protect the others. If that meant he would die, then he would die. After all, he had been wanting to say hi to his mom. The subway jerked to a stop and the doors rolled open. The four of them, Izuku, Ida, Todoroki, and Kirishima, walked out quickly, heading up the stairs and into the middle of the city district. It was bright and noisy, and all of it hurt the green-haired boy's head. Ida was walking next to him as they headed toward their destination, and he kept repeating the same thing over and over. I am only here to make sure you don't get into trouble. Izuku figured that Ida was trying harder to convince himself of this than the rest of the group. They rounded a corner and there it was, an abandoned-looking bar, out of place among the noise and lights of Kamino. Izuku started creeping slowly towards the side of the building, motioning for the others to follow. When they were behind a short wall, Izuku crouched down and sent a quick message to Jack. This next part was going to be tricky, but all Izuku could do for now was wait. He had been right there. His death had been right there. And Bakugo hadn't been able to reach him. Now he was sitting in an abandoned bar, staring at a blank wall. The villains had given up on trying to convince him to join them a while ago, leaving him to sit uncomfortably in a chair with nothing to do but stare at a boring wall and think. Bakugo didn't much like being alone with his thoughts. Normally because they were angry, but right now because they were a torrent of emotions too numerous to count. He could make out sadness and worry and guilt. A lot of guilt. Honestly, he probably would have drowned in a tsunami of guilt by now if the door on the far end of the room hadn't creaked open. Bakugo whipped his head around, narrowing his eyes at the newcomer. He wasn't a villain that he recognized. He had dark brown hair that fell around his face in curls, and when he glanced up, his eyes were a warm green. "What are you?" The man made a shushing gesture, quickly stepping forward towards Bakugo. He started removing the restraints from the blonde with deft fingers, getting them undone in a matter of seconds. Then he straightened, nodding towards the door. Bakugo stood slowly. Clearly, this man wasn't going to attack him. But then why was he here? Wasn't he a villain? He had to be, otherwise he would be dead by now. But when Bakugo looked him in the eyes, all he saw there was worry and a hint of tiredness. The man had obviously grown impatient. He placed a hand on Bakugo's shoulder, steering him towards the door. A man was leaning in the hallway on the other side, staring straight at them. He had wavy black hair that was parted to the side so it fell over his eyes. His skin seemed almost translucent, occasionally letting Bakugo see right through to his bones. Instead of raising some sort of alarm, the man in the hallway waved them away, following closely behind. Bakugo got the strange sense that he was being ushered around by security guards, the brunette walking right in front of him and the dark-haired man bringing up the rear. They made it to another door without incident, and the brown-haired man pushed it open, revealing a dark night sky and Izuku standing in the open, a hood pulled up over his hair and a mask on his face. His eyes gleamed a bright green, and they seemed to widen a fraction when they saw Bakugo. When all three of them were out the door, Izuku strode forward, pulling the mask off his face. His eyes passed right over the blonde, coming to rest on the brunette instead. "You should come with us. It already isn't safe for you three here, and if they find out who let him go..." The brown-haired man was shaking his head, watching Izuku sadly. "You know we can't do that, Izuku. As long as we can still be helpful, you better believe we're going to be." Izuku's expression looked torn. "Suk," he tried, keeping his voice steady, "please? I can't lose you guys too." When Suk didn't say anything, Izuku turned to the black-haired man, green eyes pleading. Please. You have to try and convince him that this is a bad idea. You can't stay here. They're going to find you." Jack nodded, frowning in Suk's direction. "Do you think I don't know that? Sometimes I feel like Suk gave me a little too much of his intelligence. I don't think this is a good idea either, but I can't exactly leave the other two. And before you ask," he said, cutting Izuku off before he could speak, "Tresh agrees with him." He jerked his thumb in Suk's direction, grumbling something about idiots with no self-preservation. Izuku sighed, stepping back. "Fine. But promise me that if you ever need my help, you'll call me. And don't you dare die on me, you little sheets. Got it?" Jack scoffed before nodding, turning to reopen the door. But the handle was already being turned from the inside. The group stood frozen as the door swung open, revealing Toga and Dabi. Dabi frowned at the four of them, his hands lighting up with blue fire. Leaving so soon? But we were just getting started." Toga stepped forward, a knife flashing at her side. "Zuzu, it seems you forgot something important." She waved her hand, along with the knife, towards Izuku's face. The boy reached up unconsciously, pulling his mask back over his face. He had completely forgotten about it, but it wasn't like it really mattered. All of the people around him, Suk, Jack, Dabi, Toga, and Kaken, knew who he already was. "You should leave." Izuku's voice sounded a lot more confident than he felt. He tilted his head to the side, ping an eyebrow. While you still can. Toga grinned wildly, taking a step forward. But before she or Dabi could move another step, a boom sounded from the building behind them. The villains turned slightly, eyes widening at the sound. What dash? Then Izuku froze when a voice reached his ears. It was muffled but still very loud. And very obvious as to who it was. I am here. Dabi groaned, and Toga slumped a little. Izuku inwardly kicked himself. Had he really forgotten to tell the pros about his plan? How many of them had come? What would they do when they realized that Kaken was no longer present? Izuku reached out, tugging on Bakugo's shoulder. When the blonde turned to look at him, the vigilante nodded towards the area where the other students were hiding. But before Bakugo could take even a single step in that direction, the ground shook. Izuku turned, trying to see what had caused the tremor. The building where the League of Villains had been hiding trembled. Once, twice. Then the wall of the building exploded. Izuku was blown back, along with the rest of the group that had been standing outside. He landed on the ground and rolled to his knees, coughing up dust. Blinking through the smoke, Izuku saw a figure walking out of the blown-up building. He was tall and looked human enough, but his head was strange. Even though Izuku couldn't make out his features, he knew in his gut who he was. All for one. As Izuku rose to his feet, another large figure landed in the middle of the rubble. The green-haired boy instantly knew who he was before he spoke. I am here. Again. A groan rose from next to Izuku, and he turned his head slightly to see Kaken pushing himself up onto his forearms a few feet away. The green-haired boy got to his feet slowly, turning his gaze warily back to the two men. Bakugo. When Izuku spoke, his voice was low and commanding, causing the blonde to look at him in surprise. Izuku tried to keep his tone steady as he spoke. Run. Back behind that wall, you'll find some of your classmates. Go with them and get out of here. Bakugo got shakily to his feet, glaring at all for one. Not without you. I'm not leaving you again. But Dash. Stop. Bakugo held up a hand, gaze still fixed on the now fighting men in front of him. If we're going to leave, we're leaving together. Izuku let out a shaky laugh, scanning the rubble for any sign of Suk and Jack. He spotted them standing a little ways away, watching the fight unfold in front of them. Then the other villains appeared. In a matter of seconds, Bakugo and Izuku were surrounded by Toga, Dabi, Spinner, and Twice. The vigilante glanced around, looking for any way out, but there wasn't a single opening he could see. Well, guess it was time for Plan B. Slowly, Izuku reached into his pocket, pulling out a small handgun. Before any of the villains could move, he reached out and shot a flare straight up. Not even a moment later, a slope of ice appeared to Izuku's right, and 3 figures shot out and over the rubble of the building. Ida, Todoroki, and Kirishima were flying through the air. Then Kirishima's voice rang out through the night, loud enough to be heard over the fight. Bakugo! Come on! Kaken glanced up before looking over at Izuku. The green-haired boy could see the torn look in the other's red eyes. He wanted to leave, but not without Izuku. Izuku nodded at him, smiling confidently. Go. Before it's too late. I'll be fine. I'll see you on the other side. Promise. Bakugo hesitated before nodding. Reaching out his hands, he shot into the air before any of the villains could move. Izuku watched him fly into the air, connecting with the other 3 mid-flight. Once he was sure that the students were safely out of the way, the green-haired boy called out to Jack and Suk. Jack! The black-haired man looked over at him, and he seemed to be able to tell just from Izuku's expression what he wanted. Jack nodded, turning to say something to Suk. As the villains around Izuku started advancing towards him, the ground at the boy's feet rumbled. 6 skeletons climbed out of the ground, positioning themselves around Izuku in a circle. They started fighting the villains, letting Izuku find his opening. He ran to Jack and Suk, who both had their eyes closed in concentration. Jack must have felt Izuku's presence because his concentration faltered as he glanced down at the vigilante. Time to go. Izuku nodded, turning and breaking into a run in the direction that the students must have landed. Just as they cleared the rubble and turned into a side alley, a large explosion behind them sent the group flying to the ground. Izuku slammed into a wall, groaning. Struggling to his feet, he noticed that Thresh had caught up to them at some point. He was helping Suk to his feet as Jack dusted himself off. "Guys!" Izuku turned to see that a crowd had gathered around a large television screen. As the green-haired boy exited the alley, he noticed that they were back on a main street. It was busy and bright, but at the moment all of the people were frozen, watching whatever was on the screen. The green-haired boy navigated over to the voice who had called out, stopping next to Kirishima, Ida, Todoroki, and Bakugo. They all looked windswept and giddy, worry and fear gleaming in their eyes. "You should see this." Izuku glanced up at the screen and gasped. No. All Might, or what used to have been All Might, was standing over the body of All for One, one arm raised over his head. His body looked like a skeleton, and his smile was gone. He had won. But at what cost? "Now it's your turn." Mirio reached forward and flipped the TV in front of him off. He couldn't watch it anymore. Tamaki walked up behind him, placing a hand on the blonde's shoulder. "Mirio? Are you okay?" Mirio stood, not looking Tamaki in the eyes. He turned and headed towards the door, needing to get out. Needing to do something. "I'm fine. I just have a lot of training to do." Kage hadn't gone back to UA since the Kamino Ward incident. Truthfully, he didn't know why he hadn't gone back. Maybe it was because he didn't want to confront his friends in Class 1A. Maybe it was because he didn't want to face Kaken. But whatever the reason, he hadn't gone back in 2 weeks. It was pretty obvious to Kage that Mei felt differently. You can't just avoid them forever. They miss you, and they're all really worried about why you haven't come back yet. Izuku sighed, pulling his mask off and sitting down on Mei's bedroom floor. He had known that if he had gone to see her, she would try to talk him into coming back. But he had been craving human interaction. Sure, he got his fair share at the cafe, but it wasn't the same as hanging out with a friend. Speaking of the cafe, he had been very careful at work. Whenever he saw Aizawa or Ochako or any of his other friends, he would run to the back and make Yui SWH with him. Then he would make food for a bit while his manager took the UA people's orders. "Mei, I'm not going back yet. I can't. Not for a while at least." Mei just sighed, watching him sadly. He hated that face. It was her "we're not really related, but I'm basically your big sister and I hate seeing you suffer" face. "Stop looking at me like that. I'm fine, all right?" Izuku stood up, pulling his hood up and slipping his mask back on. "I have to go now anyway, so I'll see you later." Before Mei could say anything else, Kage was already jumping out her bedroom window and swinging to the roof. He had a very specific goal for tonight. A certain group that he wanted to look into. The Shei Hasaikai was one of the main Yakuza groups in the Japan underground. Kage had started to look into them a few days after the Kamino incident, after a run-in with a man who had a crystal quirk. There was something that the vigilante found strange about the Shei Hasaikai. They were known for selling drags in the underground, but recently, everything that Kage could track from them had seemed different. He couldn't put his finger on it, but he was going to find out. After some digging, Kage had found the area where the Shei Hasaikai had been most active in recent weeks. He made his way there, running silently over rooftops, keeping one eye on his path and one on the streets below. Movement in an alley caught his attention, and he stopped, spinning on his heel and leaping down onto the street without making a sound. Slowly, Kage approached the alley, watching the figures lurking in the shadows. He glanced up and down the street, noting the absence of any people or cars. Strange, but not completely unusual. When he looked back into the alley, however, the figures had vanished. Damn it. This wasn't right. Suddenly, something moved next to him. He tried to turn towards it, but a fist caught him in the gut. Kage flew backwards, slamming into the stone wall. He slid to the ground, coughing. The vigilante tried to push himself shakily to his feet, but a hand grabbed his hood and pulled him into the alley. Kage struggled, trying to reach behind him for one of his eskrima sticks, but the man dragging him threw him against the alley wall. "Well, I'm glad you decided to show up," a voice rang through the alley, causing Kage to flinch. A man stepped out from the shadows, a large bird mask covering his face. Kage recognized him, but only by reputation. Slowly, he reached up and rubbed the side of his head while pressing a small button on his mask that covered his ear. A ringing filled his ears, like waiting for someone to pick up a call. This was his newest addition to the mask, with only one phone number programmed into it. Tsukachi speaking. What? Overhaul. Thought I might run into you here. Tsukachi's voice went silent, then Kage heard commotion, shouting, people running, but none of the voices were close enough for him to hear clearly. Then the detective's voice returned, sounding worried and urgent. We're tracking this call and we have your location. Kage, Izuku, whatever you do, stay where you are. Do you hear me? And don't you dare hang up. Then there was silence. Kage felt a little lighter. If the police were tracking his call, they were probably recording the conversation. So if he died, at least it wouldn't be for nothing. In front of him, Overhaul was speaking. Do you know how annoying it is trying to run a Yakuza group when a little runt is nosing around where he shouldn't be? Kage forced himself to let out a small laugh. I wouldn't know. I'm not really in the business of running illegal smuggling groups right now. A fist connected with his gut, and Kage gritted his teeth, refusing to make a sound. In the distance, he could just make out police sirens. Overhaul seemed to hear them too, his gaze sharpening on Kage. What did you do, you little? Kage was lifted off the ground, his back slammed into the alley wall. Despite the pain, he laughed. Me? What makes you think I did anything? Then his whole body ignited with pain. He gasped as the person holding him released him, and he dropped to the ground, clutching his stomach. It felt like his insides were being torn apart. He looked up through his blurred vision at Overhaul. Stood over him with a look of disgust clear even through his mask. Then, Kage's insides seemed to mend themselves. He lay on the ground, gasping for air, hearing the footsteps of the Shei Hasaikai members slowly walking away. Had that been Overhaul's quirk? Kage, can you hear me? What happened? Are you okay? The vigilante sat back against the alley wall, still trying to breathe normally. He managed to choke out a few words past his gasps. I'm good. Seems I underestimated him is all. Then he passed out cold. After the run-in with Overhaul, Tsukachi had managed to convince Kage to return to UA. This led to the vigilante being attacked by a swarm of his friends. Dude, you can't just disappear on us like that. We were seriously worried. Izu, if you ever do that again, I swear. You're back. Hey, Deku. Kage turned from the mob of his friends to see Kaken standing by his desk. The moment the vigilante came through the door, all his friends from 1A jumped him, talking over each other, trying to be heard. But Bakugo clearly hadn't joined in. That was a very Kaken thing to do. Kage reached up and pulled off his mask, figuring he didn't need it around the 1A kids anymore. He shot a smile at Bakugo, who definitely didn't smile back, before walking over to his desk and sitting down. Aizawa nodded at him before turning his attention to the class. Everyone shut up. I have an important announcement to make today. That instantly silenced the class. Everyone filed to their seats, listening intently to Aizawa's every word. We are having some guests today from the third-year class. These three are the top students in the whole school, and I expect you will treat them with respect. Mina raised her hand, and after a loud sigh, Aizawa called on her. Sir, may I ask why they are coming? No, you may not. Mina slumped in her seat, looking defeated. Because they will be explaining that themselves, Aizawa amended, causing the pink-haired girl to perk up a little. The door to the classroom opened again, and Izuku quickly put his mask back on. Just because he was comfortable around the 1A kids didn't mean he wanted his identity known by some third years, no matter how high-achieving they were. Kage watched as three people walked through the door. They looked like friends, but they couldn't be more different. The first student was tall, blonde, and seemed to shine like the sun, resembling a miniature All Might. The second was a girl with long, light blue hair and a bright smile. The third was slumped over a little, causing his navy blue hair to fall in his face, his expression indicating he would rather be anywhere else. The blonde guy started talking. Hey everyone. My name is Mirio, and these are my friends Nijire and Tamaki. The girl smiled and waved, but the blue-haired boy kept his eyes glued to the ground. Mirio continued explaining about internships, but Kage stopped listening. The students seemed very interested. While Kage had been gone, they had gotten their provisional hero licenses, which was usually a thing for second years. Mirio, Aizawa interrupted, causing the blonde to turn to him. Would you like to demonstrate your abilities for the class? Mirio smiled brightly, nodding. Sure thing. Though we should probably do it outside. Aizawa nodded, motioning for the class to head out the door. Kage followed, curious about what Aizawa was doing. The vigilante trailed behind the class, the third years in the lead, as they headed toward the PE training area. When they arrived, Tamaki walked over to a wall and leaned on it, watching Mirio with interest. Nijire stood next to him, also watching the blonde with a smile. Mirio stood in front of the group of 1A students, beaming. He really did look like a mini All Might. Kage caught movement out of the corner of his eye. Turning, he noticed a skinny man standing just around the corner of the building, watching Mirio. It was definitely All Might, though in his skinny form it was hard to tell. But why was he watching the third year? Kage drew his attention back to the class as the demonstration began. In seconds, all the students were lying on the ground, groaning. Mirio stood in the middle of them, beaming. Is it your turn now? Mirio asked, still smiling brightly. Kage shook his head quickly. I'm not a student, so… Yes, it is your turn. Aizawa's voice cut him off. The teacher sent Kage a glare that clearly meant this was for skipping class for weeks. Kage sighed, turning to face Mirio. But the third year was already gone. Kage whipped around, searching the ground for where Mirio would come out. The vigilante pulled one of his eskrima sticks from his sheath, bringing it down to connect with Mirio's head as he sprang up from the ground right behind Kage. He didn't want to actually hurt the third year, so he refrained from using his full power. Still, Mirio stumbled back, rubbing his head and still smiling. That was good. Did you predict where I would come out? Kage shrugged, putting the eskrima stick away. Something like that. The students had started getting to their feet, still complaining about their new bruises. Kage stepped back, watching as Aizawa talked to them for a bit. Kage found himself lost in thought. Mirio's quirk was something else. Any normal person could probably never MSTR it, no matter how much time they spent practicing. But Mirio seemed comfortable with his power. There was something strange about the way he fought. It reminded Kage of All Might. But he couldn't say. But that didn't change the facts. There was a connection between the hero and this third year, and Kage was determined to figure it out. Are you sure it's okay for us to stay here? Suk was staring up at the 1A dorms, worry written all over his face. Jack stood next to him, looking bored, while Thresh was somewhere, probably scaring some poor students while trying to make friends. At first glance, Thresh looked like a barbarian, someone straight out of a D&D game, but the truth was he was a big softy. Did that mean he was smart? No. But his efforts normally paid off, if only because he could never hurt anyone. Before Suk could argue with Izuku, several people came spilling out of the dorm building. Uraraka led the group, with Tsu and Ida right behind her. Kirishima, Mina, and Kaminari brought up the rear, dragging Bakugo along. They ran up to the three standing in front of the building, all smiling happily, except for Bakugo, obviously. Aizu, are these the friends that Aizawa was telling us about? Izuku nodded, smiling at Ochako before gesturing towards Jack and Suk. These are my friends, Jack and Suk. And if you see a big, scary-looking man with brown hair wandering around campus, that's Thresh. He's nice, don't worry. Kirishima laughed, stretching out his hand for Suk to shake. After a moment's hesitation, Suk took it. Hi, I'm Kirishima. This is Uraraka, Tsu, Kaminari, Mina, Ida, and Bakugo is the angry-looking Pomeranian. Bakugo scowled, and Jack raised an eyebrow at Izuku. Of course, Jack knew who Bakugo was. Izuku just nodded at him, not quite ready to have that conversation yet. He had told Jack about Kaken from their childhood, but not about the fact that he was here at UA. We should have a party, Ochako exclaimed, smiling brightly. Izuku looked at her, confused. A party for what? She frowned at him. Well, for starters, you coming back. Also, for your friends. Izuku shook his head, but Jack smiled mischievously. I may know just the place for a party. Really doing this? Izuku was sitting on a bar stool at the bar where Jack worked. The black-haired man had convinced his manager to let them close the whole restaurant early, allowing the 1A students to take over. Normally, the restaurant was visited by heroes, and a few regulars still showed up. Those who wanted to stay were welcomed, causing the restaurant to slowly fill up. The funniest encounter was when Miruko showed up. She walked through the door, saw Thresh, and made a beeline for him. When he saw her, his normally green flames that danced along his back turned pink. Miruko walked right up to him and punched him in the face. Then the two just started yelling at each other, pointing fingers and arguing. The group finally managed to stop them, but only after Hawks and Jack intervened. Most of the 1A kids showed up, along with a few 1B kids who hadn't actually been invited. Izuku found himself sitting in a booth, sipping coffee and listening to Ochako and Ida argue about school. Sue bumped the green-haired boy's shoulder, grabbing his attention. She smiled warmly at him, holding her cup of tea in her hands. We really missed you, you know. Ida and Ochako stopped arguing to chime in. Yes. It's no fun without you here. Someone slid into the seat on the other side of Izuku. Glancing up, the green-haired boy made eye contact with a pair of dark red eyes. He smiled at Kaken, who actually smiled back. The others at the table offered small greetings, each with varying levels of warmth. I wanted to talk to you, Kaken said, catching Izuku by surprise. About what? The blonde hesitated before answering. If it's okay, could you tell me about what happened after the incident? I just feel like I need to know what happened to you. Izuku fidgeted for a moment before nodding. Yeah, I can. It's just a long story. Hey guys. Kirishima's voice broke through the somber mood that had overtaken the table. Izuku looked up from his cup of coffee to see the redhead, along with Mina and Kaminari, sitting down at their table. Mina seemed to pick up on the mood and frowned at Izuku, worry clear in her eyes. What's going on? Izu's gonna tell us about his life, I think, Ochako said, glancing at Izuku. The green-haired boy nodded, letting her know that it was okay for them all to stay. It wasn't like any of the stuff that had happened to him was top secret or anything. Izuku sighed, trying to steady his nerves. This might be hard. Okay, well, I guess I'll start right after the incident. Izuku wiped away his tears, silently cursing himself for crying. Of course, All Might would think that he wasn't cut out to be a hero. He was quirkless, after all. Quirkless and useless. Izuku made to walk home before remembering. He didn't have a home. Not anymore. So where was he supposed to go? He couldn't go to the Bakugos because he didn't want to see the looks of pity that they were sure to give him. Well, pity from the adults, hatred from Kaken. Before he could make up his mind about what to do, a voice called out to him from a side alley. Are you really going to believe a word that false hero says? Slowly, Izuku turned to face the alley. There was a figure standing there, cloaked in shadows. His whole body seemed to be made up of some kind of smoke, spiraling out where his head and hands should have been. Instead of eyes, he had two bright yellow orbs floating in the middle of his smoky purple head. The green-haired boy should have known better than to talk to strangers. But he wasn't exactly thinking straight at the time. What do you mean? Izuku winced at the hollowness in his own voice, but the shadowy man didn't seem to notice. You may be quirkless now, but we can change that for you. If you're willing, that is. Izuku knew he shouldn't. How could he possibly believe a sketchy man that he had run into in an alley? But the boy was desperate, so he decided he was willing. It took him 2 days, 48 hours, 12 minutes, and 31 seconds, for Izuku to realize that he was no longer willing. When he had agreed to go with the Shadow Man, whose name, it turned out, was Kurojiri, he hadn't been expecting a shabby bar full of a ragtag group of villains with conflicting ideologies. But he still wanted to believe that Kurojiri had been telling him the truth. Once the other villains found out why he was there, they welcomed him, seeming excited to have him there. It was weird, but for that first day, Izuku had felt like he had a home again. Then the testing had started. Every day, Izuku would be hooked up to medical equipment and put under medication. When he would wake up, his whole body would hurt, and there would be new scars crisscrossing his arms and chest. Then, while he was still groggy and in pain, he would be shoved into a room with a creature that the others called a Nomu. Every day, he would have to fight one of the Nomu, and almost every day for the first year, he would lose. Those fights also left him with scars, but much messier ones, not the neat, linear ones he would get from the testing. At night, he would be shoved into a room by himself with no bed or bathroom. He was left alone all night and only given food when someone came to let him out in the morning. After a while, the niceness and excitement of the other villains wore thin. When Izuku walked into a room, they would simply ignore him or mutter something about how he was a failure. The only person who was nice to him was Suk. The brown-haired man would come visit him at night or bring him snacks after a particularly rough testing day. He never yelled at Izuku. He never hurt him. Suk, along with Jack and Thresh, made life with the League of Villains bearable. Until a particularly rough day of testing. Izuku had woken up in the testing chair as usual, his wrists and ankles still strapped to the uncomfortable piece of wood. Almost immediately, something had felt off. Normally, someone would be standing near him, monitoring his condition. But today, he was all alone. That was when Izuku heard the voices. It sounded like Shigaraki and Kurogiri arguing. "We've come this far. Maybe if we just give him a few more weeks." "We don't have a few more weeks. All for One is going to be here in 2 days. He expects a fully functioning human Nomu. If all we have to offer him is some sorry excuse for a teenager, he'll kill us." Izuku's brain short-circuited. Was that what this was? The League was trying to turn him into a Nomu? Into one of those monsters that the boy had been fighting for so long? Something changed in Izuku then. A resolve bubbled up inside him. He was not going to sit back anymore and let this happen to him. That night, Jack and Thresh came with Suk to visit him. Jack's mouth was set in a thin line, and his eyes showed a glimmer of fear. Suk wasn't as good at hiding his emotions. All of his worry was plastered on his face, causing Izuku's own heart to race a little faster. "What is it?" Izuku tried to keep his voice low, but it was unlikely that anyone else was awake. Suk hesitated, glancing out of the room and down the hall. Then he motioned for Izuku to follow him. The green-haired boy watched him in confusion before slowly standing up, following the 3 men out of the room. When they got to the back door, Izuku froze. "What are you doing?" he asked Jack, who was known to be the most sensible of the 3. "Nothing. Just helping you be safe. But you'll get in trouble. When the others find out." "They won't find out." Jack's voice was final, but Izuku could still see fear in his eyes. The black-haired man leaned down, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Just promise me, promise us that you'll get as far away as possible. You still want to be a hero, right?" Izuku nodded numbly. Jack's thin mouth perked up at the corners. "Then do it. I know you can. Now go." Izuku didn't wait any longer. He ran. Then I ran into my manager, Yui, and she offered to let me stay in the apartment above her cafe. I started working as a waiter a little while after that. Then, on one of my early patrols, I ran into Mei from the support course, and she helped me with my gear. The rest, well, it's not history yet, but you can bet it will be one day. Silence fell over the table. Everyone seemed to be lost in thought, mulling over the story that Izuku had just told. The green-haired boy fidgeted in his seat. Had he said too much? Were they going to hate him now? Kirishima broke the silence with a sad smile. "I'm just glad you're safe now, Aizu." Despite the somber mood, Izuku found himself smiling back. "Yeah, me too." It was a week after the party at Jack's bar, and Kage was out on afternoon patrol. This was new for him. He usually only went out at night since he had to work at UA during the day. But with all the 1A kids busy with their internships, the vigilante found himself with a lot of extra free time. This led him to hang out with Mei, Suk, Jack, and Thresh frequently. The 3 friends had managed to get an apartment around the corner from Yui's cafe, so they often came over after hours to spend time together. Kage appreciated being around his friends without worrying about being seen. Since they had left the League, Suk had seemed happier and more awake at times. Kage was glad for him. Kage jumped to the next building, glancing around. He no longer had to worry about heroes seeing him, as most knew about his UA job, but it was a habit for Kage to stay alert. Sometimes, in a room with people, he would catch himself counting every exit, figuring out the best escape plan if something went wrong. Then he would remind himself that he wasn't in constant danger anymore. Patrols were the only times Kage could slip back into his old habits from his early vigilante days. If he was honest with himself, he sometimes missed those days, when there weren't any strings attached and no one cared about him. He could throw himself into danger with the comfort that if he died, no one would miss him. But now, he had to be careful. He needed to stay alive, if only for the sake of his friends. Kage's careful eyes spotted a familiar spike of blonde hair. Bakugo was walking down a busy street, talking with what looked like Mirio. Of course, Bakugo had managed to intern with Sir Night Eye, though Kage wondered why he had chosen such a grouchy hero. Kage hopped down off the building and landed lightly next to Bakugo, causing the blonde to nearly leap out of his skin. Kage smiled wickedly. "Hey Kaken, how's your interning going?" Bakugo sighed, catching up to Mirio. The third year turned, looking surprised by the short boy dressed in dark green. Mirio smiled hesitantly. Bakugo? Do you know this person?" Kaken sighed again. "Sadly, yes. Mirio, this is Kage. I believe you met him the other day when you came to my class?" Recognition sparked in Mirio's eyes, and his smile became genuine. "Oh right. The guy who managed to actually fight me. Unlike you," he said, poking Bakugo in the shoulder. Kaken smacked his hand away, and Kage laughed. "Mind if I join you for a bit? I'm kinda bored." Mirio smiled brightly. "Sure. We're just doing a bit of a patrol, keeping an eye out for trouble." Kage frowned, wondering what Mirio had been about to say, but the tall blonde had already turned away, walking faster down the street. Bakugo followed him, and the vigilante had to jog to catch up. They walked around for a while, but they didn't encounter any trouble. In fact, they hardly ran into anyone at all. Kage was about to return to his own patrolling when he felt something, or someone, run into his leg. Glancing down, he saw a little girl sitting on the ground, rubbing her head. Her hair was white, and when she looked up, Kage noticed her dark red eyes, reminiscent of Kaken's. Speaking of Kaken, the Pomeranian appeared next to the vigilante, frowning down at the girl with concern. Kage ignored him, kneeling to be at eye level with the girl. He reached out, taking one of her hands. At the contact, she flinched back before latching onto his arm. Kage tried to speak softly. "Are you okay? I'm sorry for running into you." The girl didn't seem to hear him. She just buried her face into his chest, whispering, "Please help me." That put Kage on alert. He was about to say something else when a figure strode out of the alley from which the girl had come. Slowly, Kage looked up to meet his gaze. Overhaul stared down at Kage, recognition and disdain in his eyes. Then, the villain with the bird mask reached out, grabbing the girl's arm. "Come on, Eri. It's time to go home." The girl, Eri, didn't let go of Kage. Just then, Mirio appeared from behind the vigilante, smiling warmly at Overhaul. "Hi there, sir. Is this your daughter?" Overhaul nodded, pulling on Eri. The girl finally released Kage, stumbling back to stand next to the man in the bird mask. "Now, if you'll excuse me, we should really be getting home. Come along, Eri." With one last terrified glance at Kage, Eri followed Overhaul. The vigilante watched them until they disappeared into the shadows. Then he turned to Mirio, whose smile had faded. "Why did you let him just get away? Do you realize who that is? Do you even know what he can do?" Kage realized he was unconsciously pressing a hand to his stomach, the memory of his encounter with Overhaul a few weeks prior still fresh in his mind. Mirio stepped forward, placing a hand on Kage's shoulder. "I know who he is. He's the one we've been looking for. I wanted to get her away from him, really I did, but now wasn't the best time. We need reinforcements if we want to confront him." Kage knew Mirio was right, but it still hurt. "Fine," he spat, "but you better let me know when you decide it's the best time. Because I'm coming with you." There was only one thought in his mind as Kage shot to the top of the building, grappling hook working overtime. He was going to rescue Eri. And when he found Overhaul, Kage was determined to confront him. Kage hadn't been trying to spy on All Might and Mirio. He just happened to be in the area. It wasn't his fault if he overheard their conversation. He had been going about his normal business, walking around the UA campus, checking on security. Classes had ended for the day, and it wasn't quite his patrol time, so he was keeping himself occupied, which included climbing trees. Kage had a perfectly good reason for being 20 feet off the ground, sitting on a branch. It was to keep an eye on the front gate, definitely not for fun. The vigilante was swinging his legs back and forth when he heard voices. I don't think this mission is a good idea. That was All Might. Kage had never heard All Might sound scared before. Who could the ex-hero be talking to? I have to do this. You of all people should understand that. Eri needs a hero. That was definitely Mirio. But why were the student and the hero talking at all? Kage remembered something. Back when he had first met Mirio, he thought he had seen All Might watching him. I know, my boy, but I don't think you should risk it. Not until you have One for All completely under control. Kage almost fell out of his tree. Of course he knew about One for All. He had spent over a year around the league and had heard Shigaraki talking with a man called All for One multiple times. During those conversations, there was always at least one mention of One for All. But somehow, Kage had never connected the dots. One for All, the power that All for One wanted, and All Might, the man that All for One wanted to defeat. And now Mirio had that power, which meant he was in danger. Kage made up his mind right then and there. Even if he wasn't invited on this mission to save Eri, he would go. He needed to ensure Mirio didn't get hurt. Even if he had his issues with All Might, Kage couldn't bring himself to let such a bright light like Mirio fall. The next day, Aizawa approached him after class. The hero's serious expression immediately set Kage on edge. What is it? Aizawa paused, seemingly weighing his words. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded hollow. Bakugo told me that you were there the other day when they ran into that little girl. Kage froze, not expecting Bakugo to inform Aizawa. Did this mean the teacher had guessed his plan? Was he going to try to stop him from coming? I understand that you've had a run-in with Overhaul before that day, right? Kage nodded, forcing himself to stay calm. All right, I would like you to come with us when we go in to save the girl. This surprised Kage. He had expected Aizawa to stop him, not invite him. Kage opened his mouth to speak, but Aizawa held up a hand. I just have one condition. You have to bring those 3 friends of yours. Kage stared at him, confused. Why? Aizawa smiled humorlessly. Because at least one of them seems to have enough sense to stop you from doing something reckless. Think of them as your bodyguards. The vigilante almost laughed at that. True, Jack could probably stop him if he made any impulsive decisions, but Sook and Thresh would likely join in on the impulsive decision-making. But Kage nodded anyway. He had been planning on asking the 3 to come with him, so this was actually to his benefit. Aizawa nodded back before leaving Kage to his thoughts. One thing was for sure, Kage would need to make a stop at a certain friend's house. Are you absolutely sure that you were given permission to tag along on this mission? Izuku sighed, frowning at Mei. Yes. Aizawa told me himself that I could come. Mei smiled at him. All right. I mean, it's not like I wouldn't do this for you, even if you weren't supposed to be on the mission. I just want to know what sort of trouble to expect. The green-haired boy smiled at his friend, hugging a pillow to his chest. He had been to Mei's house many times but had never gone past her room. Sitting on her bedroom floor, he wondered what the rest of her house was like. Was it as messy as her room, or did her parents keep everything spotless? It was hard for Izuku to imagine what normal families did. Did they all sit around a table and eat meals together? Did they talk and laugh? He would never know. But it was fine. Izuku liked his life just fine, thank you. Mei threw something at his face, jolting him out of his thoughts. He looked down at the item now in his lap, a smile spreading across his face as he picked it up. I figured, since you managed to bust your old one, I would add some changes to this one. Izuku could hear the smugness in Mei's voice, but it was well-deserved. The mask in his hands was perfect. It had everything he could have asked for: a voice modulator, an earpiece, and even attached goggles. Mei, you really are amazing. The girl smiled slyly. Yeah, I know. I'm the best. Now you better get going. You've got a big day tomorrow. She wasn't wrong. Tomorrow was the day that Izuku would save Eri. Mei squeezed Kage tightly. He sighed, hugging her back. He knew what she was going to say before she pulled away with a frown. You better not die on me, you hear? No funny business. Kage managed a reassuring smile, though he didn't quite feel it. Me? Funny business? When have I ever been funny? I'm a serious guy. The vigilante tried for a serious expression, scrunching up his brows and frowning. Mei burst out laughing. All right, fine. You're right, you're the most serious person I know. Then the pink-haired girl turned to the three men standing behind Kage, shooting each of them a meaningful look. But Kage knew what that meant. Keep this idiot safe and alive, or else. Jack nodded, apparently understanding, while Sook and Thresh looked confused. Kage sighed, hugging Mei tight one more time before turning and walking away with the others, waving back at the pink-haired girl as they disappeared around a corner. Kage wasn't worried at all. He would make it out of this. They all would. And so would Eri. Don't worry. If anything goes wrong, the three of us will be there to keep you safe. Tresh's pat on the back felt more like a smack. The big man smiled down at Kage warmly. You wouldn't expect someone who looked like a punk to be so sweet, but the vigilante had gotten used to it. He found it funny that he had once been scared of Thresh. The man literally knitted as a hobby. I know that. I'm more worried about you guys. This is your first time out in the field in, 5 years? Jack nodded, and Sook tried to muster a smile that he obviously didn't feel. Kid will be fine. We've done plenty more dangerous things than this and we made it out okay, right? Okay seemed to be putting the bar a little low. But Kage just nodded, not having it in himself to argue with them. Yeah, alright. And don't worry, the vigilante said, patting Sook on the shoulder. You'll do just fine. Now if you three will excuse me, I have somewhere I need to go. Hey Mom. The grass in the graveyard where Inko Midoriya was buried had long died, but Izuku found himself sitting in it anyway, staring at the fresh bouquet of flowers on his mother's headstone. He hadn't been able to come to her grave before, and something in his gut had made him rethink that. Maybe it was the fact that he could die today. Maybe it was the fact that he felt uneasy. He felt like something was going to go wrong. Izuku shook the thoughts from his head, reading and rereading the writing on his mom's grave. In loving memory of Inko Midoriya. That was it. Nothing else. They hadn't even put her dates on it. Izuku supposed the heroes had tried to cover up Endeavor's failure as much as possible, which included making sure nothing about Inko Midoriya's grave would draw attention. But the sheer blankness of it drew all of Izuku's attention. It felt like a part of his mother that should be here was missing. He didn't even know if his mother's body was really buried here or if it was just a ceremonial gravestone. Izuku felt like the world's worst son. He didn't even know what had happened to his mother after the accident. He had been too focused on himself and his own grieving to think about her. What had she thought about in her last moments? Had she thought of him, her only son? Had she perhaps seen him there, standing in the doorway, unable to move as the ceiling caved in? Izuku couldn't be here anymore. With a few last murmured words, he stood, walking quickly out of the small graveyard. He knew one thing for certain. He would never fail someone like that again. Are you ready to go? We'll be meeting the internship students there. Aizawa's voice broke through the daze in Kage's head. He had been thinking about his mother again. He would have to stop that or he might get distracted during the mission. The vigilante nodded, standing from his seat and following Aizawa out of the classroom. The class had been dismissed early so the two could get ready, but all the other classes were still in session. Kage got a few glances as he made his way down the hall, but everyone at the school seemed to be used to him by now. Kage caught up to Aizawa, keeping stride with the hero. The two of them would be meeting Sook, Jack, and Thresh at the school gates, and then all 5 of them would make their way by train to the spot they had planned with the other heroes. This spot was mere meters away from the Shei Hasaikai hideout, which was hidden beneath a small business building. Are you doing okay? Had Aizawa just asked Kage if he was doing okay? That wasn't very like him. Well, worry could do strange things to people. Yeah. I'm fine. I'm ready to get this over with. Aizawa nodded, and the two lapsed back into silence, though they both seemed to be thinking the same thing. This might not be over for a while. Aizu. When they arrived at their destination, Ochako ran up to Kage, along with Tsu and Kirishima. Out of the corner of his eye, the vigilante could see the 3 third years, Mirio, Tamaki and Nijire, talking in hushed tones, looking worried. Kage chose to ignore it. Not his business, not his problem. So, you finally showed up, huh, Deku? Through his mask, Kage smiled at the approaching figure. Bakugo's hero costume was a little much for the vigilante's taste, but it seemed to suit the blonde. Ah, did you miss me, Kaken? Bakugo scoffed, and Kirishima smiled. The redhead didn't seem to be nervous at all, but Kage supposed that being nervous wouldn't fit with his attitude. Honestly, all of the students seemed upbeat, confident that this would be easy. Are you guys ready? Aizawa's voice rose over the group, causing the others around Kage's friends to stop their conversations too. The hobo hero split everyone up into groups. Kie, Kirishima, and Bakugo were on the inside group along with Tamaki, Mirio, Suk, Jack, and Thresh. Ochako and Tsu were on the outside group with Nijire. Before they split ways, Ochako hugged each of them in turn, smiling brightly. Well, see you guys on the other side. Can someone remind me why those 4 are here? Kage sighed, glancing behind him at Rocklock, who was walking behind him. The hero was eyeing Suk, Jack, and Thresh suspiciously. They're here to make sure that one doesn't do anything reckless, Aizawa said, pointing a finger at Kage. Next to the vigilante, Bakugo laughed. Like anyone could stop this idiot if he decided to do something stupid. Trust me, it's impossible. Kage smacked Bakugo on the shoulder, causing him to snort. Rocklock still seemed confused but decided it was better not to question it. Probably a good decision. Kage, can you tell me what you know about Overhaul's quirk? Aizawa's question made the vigilante stiffen, memories flooding in. The pain. The inability to stop it. The knowledge that his life was in Overhaul's hands, and Kage couldn't do anything about it. The vigilante felt a tap on his shoulder. His head shot up and he struck out with his arm on reflex. It was caught by Aizawa's capture weapon, the hero himself watching Kage with concern in his eyes. Are you okay? Kage pulled his hand back, shaking his head in an attempt to clear it. I'm fine. What do you want to know? Aizawa still looked worried, but he didn't push any farther. He just turned around and started walking again. Well, for starters, what does it do exactly? Kage couldn't stop a shiver from passing through his body. Kaken gave him a look, but the vigilante ignored it. It's some kind of manipulator quirk. When he used it on me, it felt like my insides were being destroyed and reshaped. Kage shakily raised a hand to his stomach, pressing his fingers hard into his gut. He still felt uneasy about it. That moment had been the first time that Kage had ever felt completely helpless. Anyway, I think as long as he can't touch you, he can't reshape you, Kage said, trying to put a note of nonchalance into his voice. From the glances he was receiving from the heroes around him, it didn't seem to be working. Aizawa just nodded, seeming to mentally store the information. Suddenly, the walls of the hall started to rock and tremble. Kage glanced at Kaken, who was looking confused. An earthquake? Then, out of the wall, an arm made of stone shot out, smashing into Fat Gum and Kirishima. The two disappeared into a hole in the wall, and before anyone could jump after them, the hole resealed itself. We need to stop the shaking. Aizawa had to shout to be heard over the creaking and crashing that the walls were making. Suddenly, just when it seemed like a huge tremor was coming, everything froze. It didn't go back to normal but stayed in its weird twisted shape. What had happened? Then Kage looked over at Rocklock, who had his hand pressed to the wall. We need to keep moving, the hero huffed, sweat rolling down his face. They kept going, Rocklock continuing to freeze walls as they got farther down the hall. Then, out of nowhere, they entered a large room that had no place in an underground secret base. This doesn't feel right, Kage said, his voice barely more than a whisper. We need to. Walls shot up out of the ground, splitting the group up. Kage spun in a circle, noticing Bakugo out of the corner of his eye. Great. So it was just the two of them. Kaken's quirk couldn't really bust through solid stone. Then, a hole opened up in the wall, letting in a blonde girl who grinned, her sharp canines glinting. Hey Zuzu. Long time, no see. Toga, Kage spat, shooting a look at Bakugo. Stay back. The girl stalked slowly forward, still grinning. That was so rude of you, stealing our friend like that. Someone should really teach you a lesson about manners. Quick as lightning, she leapt forward, a knife flashing in her right hand. Kage leaped to the side, but all of a sudden, his gut felt like it had been set on fire. The vigilante stumbled back, staring down at the knife handle sticking out of his body. The little troublemaker had been holding two knives. Vaguely, Kage noticed Bakugo fighting Toga out of the corner of his eye, yelling something. But Kage couldn't hear anything. His ears had stopped working, and it seemed his eyes would be following suit. The vigilante slumped against the recently constructed wall, his mind swimming. He knew, in some distant part of his brain, that he was here for a reason. For what? He was here to get someone. Who was it again? The girl maybe? A girl with red eyes. Kage glanced up through his darkening vision, seeing red eyes floating over him. The person was shouting something, probably yelling at him. What had he done now? Those weren't the girl's eyes, were they? Kage managed one cohesive thought before drifting completely. I need to save that girl, whoever she is. Hey Deku. Hey Deku, wake up. Kage slowly opened his eyes, confused by the noise all around him. Where was he again? The vigilante couldn't quite remember. He blinked through the fading haze of his vision at the worried face floating over him. Kaken's face. Kage sat up slowly, wincing at the pain in his side. Bakugo fell back with a sigh of relief at the movement. Oh, thank God. We thought you died for a second. Gingerly, Kage pressed a hand to his gut. Why didn't it hurt as much anymore? Kaken seemed to notice his confusion and shrugged, relief still evident on his face. The blonde held up a small bottle, now empty. I found this in your pocket. Figured it couldn't hurt to try it. Kage stared at him in shock. You mean to tell me you gave me something you had no idea about in the hope that it would make me better instead of worse? Bakugo just shrugged again. Kage sighed, glancing around. Now that he was looking, he saw that the walls were gone. Aizawa was standing next to the crumpled form of someone that Kage didn't recognize. Probably the cause of all the wall trouble, from the way Aizawa and Sir Night-Eye were glaring at him. Shakily, Kage got to his feet. The liquid that Bakugo had given him had been more of Recovery Girl's healing medicine, which explained how much better his stomach felt. As he stood up, three figures came rushing over with varying expressions of worry. Suk was breathing heavily, Thresh looked extremely worried, and Jack just looked indifferent. The black-haired man came marching up to Kage and flicked his forehead. The vigilante blinked up at Jack in confusion. Jack just frowned. That was stupid of you. Kage stared at him in disbelief. Getting stabbed was stupid of me? Wow, I would have never known if you hadn't told me. Jack just scoffed, turning and walking away. Suk gave Kage an apologetic look. Sorry about him. He really does care, you know? Kage sighed. Yeah, I know. Plus, he seemed the most stressed out about you bleeding out on the ground. Well, besides that blonde kid, Thresh said cheerfully, all of his worry gone. At the sound of blonde kid, Bakugo glanced up. Thresh gave him a wave, smiling brightly. Kaken waved back, clearly confused. We'll never get to Eri fast enough this way. That was Mirio's voice. Kage turned, taking in the sight of the worried third year. His normally smiling face had a slight frown creased across it. Night-Eye came up behind him, putting a hand on Mirio's shoulder. Yes, we will. Mirio just shook him off. Not all of us. But I can. Kage knew what he meant. His quirk, which let him phase through matter, would definitely get him there a lot faster. But wasn't it dangerous for him to go alone? I'll come with you. I can ghost through walls, Jack said, speaking over the now arguing heroes. That shut most of them up, and Mirio smiled at Jack. All right, then it's settled. Let's go. And with that, Lemillion disappeared through a wall. After a quick look at Suk, Jack followed, turning to smoke before ghosting through the stone. Okay, let's try to catch up to them as quickly as possible. If they get stuck with Overhaul all by themselves. Night-Eye's voice faded out, but everyone knew what he had been going to say. If those two had to fight Overhaul by themselves, they would most definitely lose. After running through more halls for about 10 minutes, the group of heroes that was left entered another room, larger than the last one. Tamaki had recently peeled away from the group to fight a few small villains, and Rocklock had stayed behind to make sure the way out stayed open for them. So now it was just Bakugo, Night Eye, Aizawa, Suk, Thresh, and Kage. The room was large and open, but the normally smooth ground was littered with sharp rock spires. And blood. Kage whipped around, trying to see any sign of people. Mirio was fighting Overhaul with little success, while Jack was pulling a crying Eri into his arms, trying to calm her as skeletons rose up around him. The fight was not going in their favor. Mirio was dripping blood from multiple deep-looking wounds, though he was somehow still on his feet. Jack was bleeding from a cut on his head, red streaming down his face. Thresh cried out, and more skeletons burst from the ground, running at Overhaul. The villain turned, taking in the new group of people who had entered. He scowled, pulling a gun from his belt and aiming it at Eri. Kage recognized the weapon. It was one of the quirk erasing guns. Before Kage could move, someone was already running past him, jumping in front of Jack and Eri. The dart hit the man in the chest, causing him to stumble back and fall to the ground. All at once, the skeletons around the room started dissolving, melting into piles of ash on the floor. Thresh cried out, running forward, but the damage was already done. Slowly, Suk pulled the dart from his chest, the quirk erasing dart that had been meant for Eri. Kage rushed forward, grabbing Suk by the shoulders. The other heroes had engaged in combat with Overhaul, but to Kage, it was all just background noise. He shook Suk, trying to get the brunette to look at him. Hey, to me. Come on. Izuku. The voice cut through Kage's panic. He turned, looking past Suk at Jack, who was still holding Eri in his arms. But something was wrong. His normally pale face was now almost white, and the light in his eyes was dimming. No. Kage whirled around, looking for Thresh. The big guy was sitting on the ground, eyes wide as he watched his hands slowly turn to dust. This couldn't be happening. Kage turned back to Suk, unable to hide the rage in his voice. Why did you do it? I could have done it. It should have been me. Look at them. You've sealed their fates. Izuku, stop. Jack's voice was final, but his eyes were sad. In his arms, Eri was still crying, silent tears rolling down her face. As Kage watched, Jack's legs started to disintegrate. The black-haired man sank to his knees, still not wanting to let go of Eri. Izuku, don't blame him. It was our choice too. Thresh's voice was sad, but when Kage looked at him, the big man had a small smile on his face. You forget that we can talk to each other in our heads. So they really had been a part of this decision. Had they really chosen to die rather than have Eri lose her quirk, though? Kage shook his head. Of course they had. He would have done the same thing if he were in their shoes. I'm so sorry. Suk's voice was soft, full of sadness. I didn't know what else to do. It was worth it though. Thresh sounded certain, his voice unwavering. As long as we can save someone, it was worth it. I would say see you on the other side, but I don't actually know if summons get to go to heaven. Thresh was still smiling, but there were tears in his eyes as the last of his head disappeared. Kage turned back to Jack, who had carefully set Eri on the ground. The girl was still clinging to his disintegrating sleeve, crying. Jack glanced up, meeting the vigilante's eyes. He gave a small smile, inclining his head. It's been an honor, Kage. Then he too was gone. All that was left of Kage's friends were 2 piles of ash. And a small fortune cookie, lying on the ground near Eri. Slowly, with trembling hands, Kage picked it up and cracked it open. It was completely empty. Kage dropped the 2 halves of the cookie to the ground, watching as it too disintegrated. Eri was still sitting on the ground, sobbing silently, surrounded by dust. Dust that had once been Kage's friends. Suddenly, Kage felt the ground rumble under him. He tried to get to his feet, get into a fighting stance. He couldn't sit here being an easy target. Before he could move out of the way, though, a rock spire shot out of the ground in front of him, aimed straight at his chest. This was it. He was about to die. A figure leaped in front of him, taking the spear straight to the heart. Kage gasped, stepping back as Mirio fell to the ground, coughing up blood. Not him too. Kage dropped to his knees next to the third year, trying to help him. But the moment the vigilantes saw the wound in Mirio's chest, he knew there was nothing he could do. The hole that the spire had left gaped open, blood spilling out over the blonde's hero costume. And somehow, Mirio was still smiling. Blood trickled from his mouth, down his chin. Blood pooling on the ground underneath him. Blood everywhere. Not again. Not someone else. Why can't it just have been me? Mirio squeezed Kage's hand, getting the vigilante's attention. You know about one for all, right? Mirio's voice was slurred, his eyes slowly losing focus. He had to stay conscious. Kage nodded, gently shaking the third year's shoulder to keep him awake. Yeah. I know. Mirio smiled wider. I saw you that day, up in the tree. I was worried you might tell someone, but I shouldn't have been. You'll make a great hero, you know. Before Kage knew what was happening, Mirio pressed his bloodied hand to a small cut on Kage's arm. The vigilante's eyes widened as their blood mingled, Mirio's essence making its way into his veins. Then the power came rushing in. Kage felt it even before the green lightning started flickering over his body. For what? Why would Mirio give this power to him? He didn't deserve it. He had let two of his closest friends die, and he hadn't been able to stop it. He had let his own mother die without being able to stop it. How could he become a hero? Mirio must have seen the turmoil in Kage's eyes, because his bright smile turned comforting, his gaze becoming more unfocused. Don't worry. You can become a great hero. I believe in you. Then he was gone. Lumillion was dead, and Izuku Midoriya had the strongest quirk in history. Eri was screaming. Kage spun around, taking in the scene before him with wide eyes. Eri was holding on tightly to Suk as the brunette clung to her, trying to keep her in his arms. With a firm grip on Eri's wrist, Overhaul was pulling her in the other direction, towards the new hole in the ceiling. But Overhaul didn't look like himself. There were two new sets of arms coming out of his sides, and large wings were flapping at his back. Kage resisted the urge to GG, turning to see the state of the other heroes. Aizawa was lying on the ground, trying to pull himself to his feet. Bakugo was struggling to get through the stone cage that had been put around him. Night Eye had it worst. He was standing up straight, but not by choice. The thing that was keeping him upright was the spear of stone through his stomach. Kage already knew there was nothing he could do. He turned, running towards Overhaul. The villain had managed to pull Eri from Suk's arms and was now flapping into the sky. Kage took a running jump, feeling his newfound power surge through his legs, propelling him up. Eri! Kage reached out his hand, desperately trying to reach her. Eri looked up, tears rolling down her face as she watched the vigilante fly through the air towards her. Why wasn't she trying to escape? Something clicked for Kage. Maybe she felt like she couldn't. He took a chance, shouting as loudly as he could. Your quirk isn't evil. Because you aren't evil. Your quirk is perfect. Eri's eyes widened, the red pupils dilating. Overhaul hissed, trying to hold on to her as he flew up, but it was pointless. Eri wriggled out of his arms, launching herself at Kage. The vigilante caught her in midair, still shooting up and out of the hole and into the daylight. Screams erupted as Overhaul shot out of the hole, his teeth bared and a hiss escaping his lips. Kage saw people running left and right, trying to get out of the way of the rampaging villain. How could Kage stop him all by himself? You can become a great hero. I believe in you. Resolve filled Kage, and he made his decision. He would stop Overhaul right here, right now. No one else was going to die today. Taking a deep breath, he let one for all come rushing in. Green lightning began to flicker over Kage's body. His hair floated up, and though he couldn't see it, he had a feeling his eyes were glowing. That was good. He had to keep the power controlled. Kage glanced up at where Overhaul was circling. After quickly tying Eri to his back with spare fabric, he let in a little more power. Kage shoved off the ground, rocketing into the sky towards the massive shape of Overhaul. Right when he got close enough, the vigilante brought up his hand, punching the villain even farther up into the sky. Kage felt the bones in his arm and hand shatter. He cried out, pulling the arm back into himself. That wasn't good. Suddenly, a wave of warmth spread over him. Kage watched, shocked, as his arm seemed to mend itself, the bones fitting back together perfectly. Was that the effects of One for All? No, it couldn't be. Still flying through the air towards a distant overhaul, Kage glanced over his shoulder at Eri. She had her eyes screwed tight, and her horn was glowing. In fact, her whole body was glowing, seeping energy. This was her quirk. It really was an amazing power. Kage smiled, turning his attention back to overhaul. This was ending now. Afterwards, Kage wouldn't be able to remember how he had done it. All he knew was that when his mind cleared, he was falling towards the ground, flying after the unconscious shape of overhaul. He was aware, in the back of his mind, that his mask was gone, probably lost in the fight. In that moment, however, he didn't care. Kage just had to make sure that Eri was safe. At the last second, right before impact, he activated his new quirk, cushioning his crash. Dropping into a roll, Kage pulled Eri into his arms. The little girl still had her eyes shut tight, breathing raggedly. Did she not know how to deactivate her quirk? Kage felt all his wounds from the day vanish, then old, healed wounds would rip open. The vigilante fell to his knees, his head spinning. Then, a very painful wound opened up on his stomach. It was the exact same wound he had received from that villain months before, on the very first night he had run into Izuku. How had his life changed so much since that night? Kage could barely remember a time when 1A hadn't filled his days. Had there really been a time when Kage hadn't had people he could count on? In his arms, Eri shivered, whimpering. Then her horn shrunk, and her quirk stopped. Through a haze, Kage glanced up at Izuku, who was limping quickly towards him. When he got close enough, Kage shakily got to his feet, pushing Eri into the hero's arms. "We did it," was all Kage managed to say before his mind went blank and he collapsed, fading into the darkness. "You don't appear to have any injuries, either external or otherwise." The doctor eyed Kage's upper body with suspicion, following the lines of scars on the vigilante's arms and chest. "But these scars are strange. How did you say you got them again?" "Kage, we need you. Now." Izuku poked his head through the door into the vigilante's hospital room. Kage put his shirt back on quickly, giving the doctor a small nod before following Izuku out of the room. "Where are we going?" Izawa's gaze was far away, as if he was thinking about something else. Probably everything that had happened earlier. The hero blinked, pulling himself back to the present. "To Night Eye's room. He wanted to see you for some reason." Kage nodded, wondering why Night Eye would want to see him specifically. The vigilante couldn't remember ever having had even a single conversation with the grumpy hero. "How are the others doing?" Kirishima, Fat Gum, and Tamaki made it out with minimal damage. Bakugo had some minor wounds, but he'll be fine after a few days. Nijire, Tsu, Uraraka, and Rocklock are all okay. As for the others... Izawa's voice trailed off, and Kage's heart sank. Had no one else made it? What about Eri? Izuku seemed to leap at the chance to change the subject. Eri is in a comatose state. Her quirk has been having trouble, and I've been helping as much as I can. The teacher pushed open a door off the hall they had been walking down, entering the room beyond. Kage followed slowly, noticing the only other person in the room. All Might was standing by the head of Night Eye's bed, in his shrunken form and with his head low. When Izuku walked into the room, All Might glanced up for a second before turning his attention back to his old sidekick. Night Eye was dying. Kage knew that the moment he saw the man. He was lying in a hospital bed, medical equipment strapped to every inch of his stomach and chest. The large rock spear that had impaled him was still stuck through his middle. It was too big of a wound to heal. "You're here." Kage glanced up, seeing Night Eye's eyes on him. Slowly, the vigilante walked forward to stand next to All Might. "Yeah, I'm here. Why did you want to see me, sir?" Night Eye coughed, a little bit of blood coming out of his mouth. "I wanted to ask about Mirio." A pit grew in Kage's stomach, consuming him. So Night Eye knew then that Mirio was dead? "How is he?" The vigilante froze. So he didn't know. Well, Was it really worth it to lie to the man? Kage didn't want to send him to his grave with the knowledge that his sidekick was already dead. Stealing his nerves, the vigilante made up his mind. He's doing just fine. Night Eye smiled sadly. Thank you. Then his eyes closed and he flatlined. Kage and the two heroes with him were rushed out of the room, a group of doctors running in. But the vigilante knew it was too late. He was already gone. No one else. You said there would be no one else. You failed. You failed them all. Why should you get to live? Didn't they deserve to live? What makes you so special? Izuku? Are you? I have to go. As quickly as he could, Kage ran through the hospital. He found a back door that led into a side alley and stumbled out, breathing heavily. Ripping off his mask, the vigilante pulled his grappling hook from where it still hung on his belt, aiming and shooting it up to the top of the roof. Before he could press the button to retract it, however, someone spoke behind him. So that's it then? You're just gonna run away? Izuku turned slowly to see Bakugo standing in the doorway back into the hospital. His arm and chest were bandaged under his t-shirt, and his expression was unreadable. Please. Just let me leave. I can't. I failed them. Shut up. Kaken's voice wasn't as harsh as Izuku would have expected. Whatever you try to say, I know that if I let you leave right now, I'm never going to see you again. And I already said I wasn't going to let you go again. The grappling hook slipped from Izuku's hand, and he crumpled to the ground, breaking down. Tears rolled down his face as his body shook with silent sobs. Then, suddenly, warm arms wrapped around him, pulling him into a hug. Izuku blinked, taking in the familiar scent of his old friend. Why was Kaken hugging him? In that moment, it didn't even matter. Izuku clung to Bakugo, letting all the emotions he had been bottling up for 4 years come spilling out. I never told you how sorry I was. Bakugo's voice held so much pain. Izuku couldn't understand it. For all the things I said and did. Izuku, I'm so sorry. We may have a slight problem. Izuku glanced up at Aizawa as the hero walked into the room. What is it? Aizawa didn't say anything, just held out a laptop. The computer was open to a video. Oh no. How are we supposed to fix this? Nizu glanced up at the men in front of him. Tsukachi looked worried, while Aizawa looked frustrated. The principal sighed, taking a long sip of his tea. You don't seem the least bit surprised to find out that Kage is a teenager. Is it possible that you already knew? Tsukachi asked, tipping his head to the side. Nizu let out a laugh, smiling widely. Of course I already knew. I found out months ago. You really expect someone to walk around my school and not be found out? Aizawa sighed, dropping his head into his hands. Great, so you knew. Do you want a pat on the back, or are you going to help us? Nizu once again watched the shaky video that the hero had shown him. There was a moment in the video where the person filming had gotten a clear shot of Izuku's face. Without his mask on. The video had been taken during the boys' fight with Overhaul, and since Izuku had been wearing his vigilante gear but not his mask, it would no doubt lead many people to the right conclusion. Well, I do have one idea. Aizawa glanced up, looking slightly hopeful. What? Nizu smiled widely. Make him a student. As of next year, Izuku Midoriya will be joining your class. Class 1 erupted at Aizawa's words, all of them whirling around to talk to each other. Izuku just smiled, leaning back against the classroom wall. Aizawa had broken the news to him the previous day, and the green-haired boy was definitely not opposed to the idea. Especially now that he had a quirk to match. But there was still a part of Izuku that couldn't fathom it. After so long of convincing himself that he couldn't be a hero, that he would never get a quirk, the impossible had happened. That reminded him. Izuku nodded at Aizawa before turning and leaving the room, waving to the students as the door shut behind him. He had to talk with someone. Hey Suk. The brunette glanced up from the picture he had been staring at. Since the overhaul incident, Suk had gone extremely quiet. The only people he would speak to were Izuku and Eri. Speaking of Eri, the girl was currently curled in Suk's lap, reading a picture book. She looked content, and it made Izuku's heart swell. This is how she should have grown up, surrounded by people who loved her. Izuku sat down next to Suk on the floor of the man's room. It was a lot cleaner since the last time the green-haired boy had been in it. The night after the incident, Izuku had heard a commotion from Suk's room, and when he had gone to check it out, he had found the man sitting in the middle of a wrecked room, shaking with sobs. Izuku hadn't known what to do at the time, but once Eri had been released from the hospital, she had been basically attached to Suk, and the brunette seemed glad for the distraction. Izuku had the feeling that Suk thought of Eri as his last connection to his lost friends, and he could understand that. Jack and Thresh had given up everything to keep Eri safe, and they would have been proud that Suk was continuing that in their absence. "Are you eating?" Suk nodded, looking back at the picture in his hands. It was old, wrinkled, and worn out, but Izuku could still make out the faded image of three boys leaning on each other, smiling happily. "This was the first time I successfully summoned them at the same time. I can't believe it's been so long." Suk's voice was rough from its lack of use, his eyes watering. Then he shook his head, putting on a small smile. "You should get going. You've got that meeting in a few minutes." Izuku nodded, standing up to leave. "I did that thing you asked for, but I'm still confused. Why do you need these gloves exactly?" Izuku smiled at Mei, pulling on the gloves she had handed him. They looked a lot like his vigilante gear, except in gray and with a lot more support. "You'll see." The green-haired boy turned to All Might, who nodded at him, smiling. Izuku nodded back, turning to face the clearing they were standing in. He raised his right arm, using his left hand as support. Izuku curled his right hand and made a flicking motion at the last second, pushing 5% of one for all into his fingers. Air was pushed past him from the force, shooting through the trees and rocking them back and forth, making it look like they were in a hurricane. Izuku couldn't suppress the wide grin on his face as he turned to face Mei, whose eyes were as wide as plates. "How? You know what? Don't tell me. I'm gonna figure it out all on my own." Mei smiled, giving Izuku a hug before turning and running back in the direction of her class. Izuku smiled after her, waving until she disappeared from view. It's always good to be close with a support team member. All Might's voice sounded much quieter when he was in his small form. Izuku turned to him, feeling his smile slip a bit. All Might must have seen it, because his own smile faltered slightly. "I wanted to tell you something. About that day." Izuku held up his hand, stopping the hero. "I don't want an apology. But I do want to make one thing clear. I am not doing this for you. I'm doing it for Mirio." Then he turned and left, leaving the hero to stare after him. The school festival was today, and Class 1A had decided to do a concert. Izuku's only role, make sure Eri had a good time. So far, he had failed, but the green-haired boy hoped that he would at least get her to smile by the end of the day. Before he knew it, Izuku was getting into his seat for 1A's performance, Eri cradled in his arms. Honestly, Izuku was really excited for the performance. The students had been working on it for weeks, and they all seemed super excited about it. The lights dimmed, and the crowd went silent. Then the music started. Jairu stood front and center on stage, her other band members playing around her. The rest of the kids were dancing as Jairu began to sing. Then Aoyama dropped from the ceiling. His laser spun around the large room, making everything light up. Streamers fell from the roof as lights that looked like diamonds shone all around. Izuku looked down at where Eri was sitting on his lap, and he almost started crying. The girl had the biggest smile Izuku had ever seen lighting up her face. She jumped up, waving her arms in the air and giggling widely. Then Izuku really was crying, hoisting Eri onto his shoulders so she could see better. "Are you seeing this, Jack? Thresh? Mirio? She's smiling. We really did it. 7 years later, and he's done it again, folks. Number 1 Deku, along with his partner Ground Zero, has managed to take down the villain." Eri jumped up and down on the couch. "Suk, come look, Big Brother Deku is on TV." Suk walked into the room from the kitchen, looking curious. Jack followed right behind him, smiling warmly at the girl. Eri was almost 12 now, but she still liked to call Izuku Big Brother. To her, he would probably always be that. After graduating from UA, Izuku had managed to become a sidekick to Hawks, and from there he had worked his way up to number 5, then 2, then 1. Bakugo, who had become Miruko's sidekick, was now the number 2 hero, but for once, the blonde wasn't mad about being second best. The two now ran a hero agency together. It was common knowledge that Deku had started out as the Vigilante Kage, but most people didn't actually know the story behind his transformation. The civilians and the media were left to wonder how such a big-time vigilante had managed to become the biggest deal since All Might. After 2 years of quirk training with Aizawa, Eri had been ready to attempt to use her quirk on Suk. Their efforts had paid off since she succeeded in bringing his quirk back after only one attempt. With his quirk returned, and subsequently Jack and Thresh, Suk had gotten a lot happier. Whether they had become spotlight heroes or underground ones, all of 1A had become great heroes. The old class would often meet up at Yui's cafe for lunch, talking and laughing and telling stories about their lives. All for One had died in Tartarus 2 years prior, and All Might had retired from being a teacher. Aizawa still taught hero students at UA, and occasionally one of them would ask him about what it was like to train the number 1 hero. Aizawa would just smile. It was an absolute nightmare. Deku had managed to master One for All. After a bit of trouble involving past users' quirks, he had gotten everything under control, even learning how to use a few of the more prominent quirks, such as Nana Shimura's float and another's black WHP. And, of course, Mirio Togata's quirk, permeation. Even though he had achieved his dream, Izuku still found himself wishing he could go back. He missed the days of hopping across rooftops, outrunning heroes, and defeating villains from the shadows. But he was never ungrateful. Too many people had lost their lives getting him to where he was today. So Izuku had made a promise to himself. As long as Izuku Midoriya was alive, he would save as many people as possible. And he was going to do it with a smile. The end.